The vast expanse of Eastern Europe, the foundational stage for Kievan Rus, is defined by its great river systems and dual ecological zones. Unlike the mountainous topography that constrained other European peoples, this region presented a broad, open-ended landscape crisscrossed by interconnected waterways. The Dnieper, Volga, and Dniester rivers were not merely natural features, but acted as the primary arteries of trade, migration, and settlement, profoundly influencing the development of the early Slavic communities. Archaeological evidence confirms the strategic importance of these liquid highways, revealing the earliest fortified Slavic towns such as Ladoga and Novgorod emerging at crucial points along these routes. These settlements were positioned to control the flow of commerce and provide defense, indicating that the rivers were already perceived as channels of power and wealth. The landscape itself was divided into two distinct environments: the dense coniferous forests of the north and the expansive treeless grasslands or steppes to the south. This ecological duality dictated the subsistence strategies of the early inhabitants. In the forests, Proto-Slavic peoples subsisted through a combination of shifting agriculture, hunting, and beekeeping. The archaeological record, particularly from the early Slavic cultures like the Penkovka and Prague-Korczak, reveals a material culture adapted to this environment, characterized by semi-subterranean dwellings and simple handmade pottery. Their isolation within the woodlands provided a degree of protection but also limited their exposure to outside influences. Conversely, the southern steppe, with its vast grasslands, was the domain of nomadic peoples. This open landscape, while fertile, offered no natural barriers against invaders, necessitating a highly mobile and militarized lifestyle for its inhabitants. The constant migration and conflict along the steppe frontier introduced a diverse array of cultural and technological influences to the region. The archaeological record from the Chernyakov culture, for example, demonstrates a sophisticated synthesis of Germanic, Sarmatian, and Slavic elements, a clear result of cultural contact and exchange along the Dnieper trade route. The rivers, therefore, served not only as routes of commerce, but as conduits for the transmission of ideas, technologies, and military practices between the forest-dwelling Slavs, the nomadic peoples of the steppe, and the more established civilizations of the Baltic and Byzantium. This geographic stage, defined by its navigable rivers and varied environments, provided the essential framework for the political and economic ascent of Kievan Rus. However, as Kievan Rus history has shown, many of the well-thought decisions resulted in quite opposite outcomes. Because how could a well-intentioned law designed to prevent conflict have actually been the hidden cause of the state's downfall? Why did the decline of one crucial river lead to the collapse of an entire kingdom's central power? And, most interestingly, how is it possible that the brutal subjugation of a foreign empire didn't just destroy a Kievan Rus civilization, but inadvertently provided the very blueprint for its eventual rebirth? A journey into the origins of the early Slavic communities requires a meticulous examination of the archaeological and linguistic record, as these peoples left no written histories of their own. Emerging from the forested landscapes of Eastern Europe during the early centuries of the Common Era, the Proto-Slavs can be traced through the distinctive artifacts and settlement patterns of archaeological cultures such as the Penkovka, Prague-Korczak, and Kolochin. These cultures, flourishing from the 5th to 7th centuries CE, exhibit a shared material identity that distinguishes them from their Germanic and nomadic neighbors. Excavations reveal a subsistence economy centered on shifting agriculture, where small plots of land were cleared, cultivated for a few years, and then left fallow. This practice is supported by finds of simple iron plowshares and grain storage pits, primarily containing millet, wheat, and barley. The distinctive Proto-Slavic settlement was typically a small, unfortified village, comprised of several semi-subterranean dwellings known as zemlyanki. These houses, dug into the earth to a depth of up to 1 meter, featured wooden or log walls and a thatched roof, providing protection from the harsh climate. They often contained a central hearth and were clustered together in a way that suggests a close-knit, family-based social structure. Burial practices from this period were equally revealing. Cremation was the dominant rite, with the ashes often placed in simple urns and interred in flat cemeteries, a significant departure from the elaborate burial mounds and weapon deposits of their nomadic predecessors and contemporaries. This practice, combined with a general lack of elaborate grave goods, suggests a relatively egalitarian social structure without the pronounced hierarchies of warrior aristocracies seen elsewhere. The material culture of the Proto-Slavs was functional and utilitarian. Their pottery, typically handmade without the use of a potter's wheel, was coarse but robust, with simple incised or impressed decoration. These vessels served for cooking, storage, and food preparation, reflecting a society focused on agrarian survival. Metalworking was also present, but on a smaller scale than in the Roman or Germanic world, with iron tools and simple bronze ornaments being the most common finds. Linguistic analysis provides additional support for this shared Proto-Slavic identity, revealing a common lexicon for agricultural terms, kinship, and basic social organization that predated the later differentiation into West, East, and South Slavic languages. This pre-literate period, defined by agrarian communities and a cohesive material culture, represents the crucial stage in which the Slavic peoples slowly emerged from the obscurity of prehistory, setting the stage for the later political and cultural flowering of Kievan Rus. The formation of the Kievan Rus state is inextricably linked to one of the most enduring scholarly debates in Eastern European history, the Varangian question. This academic controversy centers on the precise role of the Varangians, the Norsemen, or Vikings in the establishment and early governance of the Rus state. The debate is broadly divided into two opposing viewpoints: the Normanist theory and the anti-Normanist view, each supported by distinct interpretations of archaeological, linguistic, and textual evidence. The Normanist theory, which holds significant sway among many historians, posits that the Rus state was founded and initially governed by Varangian chieftains. This view is primarily based on the primary chronicle, a foundational historical text compiled in the 12th century. The chronicle's account, often referred to as the calling of the Varangians, describes how Slavic, Finno-Ugric, and Baltic tribes, plagued by internal strife, invited the Varangian prince Rurik to rule over them in 862 CE. Proponents of this theory point to the linguistic evidence that the name Rus itself may derive from the Old Norse term for oarsman, Rothi, suggesting a Scandinavian origin for the ruling elite. Furthermore, a substantial body of archaeological evidence from burial sites and settlements like Ladoga and Novgorod reveals a clear and early presence of Scandinavian artifacts, including weapons, jewelry, and runic inscriptions, indicating a direct cultural and political influence. Conversely, the anti-Normanist view argues that the role of the Varangians was marginal and that the Rus state developed organically from indigenous Slavic political and social structures. This perspective maintains that the Varangians were primarily merchants and mercenaries, not founders or rulers. Anti-Normanist scholars often argue that the primary chronicle was a later political construct intended to legitimize the Rurikid dynasty by connecting it to a prestigious foreign lineage. They highlight the fact that the Slavic tribes were already developing complex political organizations prior to the Varangian arrival. The presence of Scandinavian artifacts, according to this view, simply reflects the robust trade networks and cultural exchange common in the era, rather than foreign domination. These scholars emphasize that the Rus language and culture remained overwhelmingly Slavic, with the Varangian elite quickly assimilating into the local population, further supporting the idea of a pre-existing, strong Slavic identity. Ultimately, while modern scholarship acknowledges the indisputable presence and influence of the Varangians, the extent of their impact on the formation of Kievan Rus remains a complex and vigorously contested topic. Just a quick announcement: if you enjoy this video so far, please subscribe to our channel, as it motivates us to bring you a new story every evening. This is the only kind request tonight, and we won't bother you with it anymore until the very end of today's story. Let's get back to the video. The emergence of Kievan Rus was not a sudden event, but the culmination of a gradual process of political and economic consolidation, a process evidenced by the rise of a network of fortified towns. These settlements, appearing along the major riverine trade routes during the 8th and 9th centuries CE, represent the first tangible signs of a more sophisticated social and political organization among the early Slavs and their neighbors. Rather than simply being collections of agrarian dwellings, these towns were strategic hubs, reflecting a growing need for defense, commerce, and centralized authority. Archaeological excavations at sites such as Ladoga, Novgorod, and Izborsk provide clear evidence of these early urban centers. Ladoga, often cited as one of the oldest, shows layers of settlement dating back to the mid-8th century. Its strategic location at the mouth of the Volkhov River, where it flows into Lake Ladoga, made it a critical control point for the trade route that connected the Baltic Sea with the Dnieper and Volga river systems. The town's defenses were initially simple, consisting of earthen ramparts and wooden palisades, which were later replaced by more robust stone fortifications. These defensive structures indicate that the town's inhabitants were not just merchants, but also military actors, capable of mobilizing labor and resources for collective security. Novgorod, meaning new city, emerged as another key hub on the Volkhov River. Its archaeological record reveals a planned settlement with sophisticated infrastructure, including paved streets and elaborate drainage systems. Like Ladoga, Novgorod's fortifications were crucial, protecting its market square, administrative buildings, and the homes of its wealthy merchant class. The town served as a major collection point for goods furs, honey, and wax that were then transported south toward Byzantium. Further south, the town of Izborsk provided a crucial defensive position, protecting the Pskov region and the headwaters of the Velikaya River, another important tributary of the Baltic trade network. These towns were more than just fortified marketplaces. They were nascent political entities. The presence of specialized craft production, metalworking, woodworking, and pottery demonstrates a division of labor that extended beyond basic agrarian life. The accumulation of wealth from trade led to the development of a social hierarchy, with a ruling elite of merchants and warriors who controlled the surrounding lands and the tribute-paying populace. The defensive fortifications, which were costly to build and maintain, required a level of collective organization and a centralized power structure that was a fundamental departure from the simpler, family-based societies of the Proto-Slavic era. Thus, these settlements represent the crucial first step in the formation of a unified Rus state, providing the political and economic infrastructure that would eventually be co-opted and expanded by the Varangian rulers. The establishment of the Rurik dynasty, the foundational ruling house of Kievan Rus, is a subject of both historical record and legendary narrative, primarily preserved in the 12th century primary chronicle. This pivotal account describes a period of internal strife and fragmentation among the Slavic and Finno-Ugric tribes inhabiting the region around Lake Ladoga. According to the chronicle, these tribes, unable to maintain order and governance among themselves, chose to invite a foreign ruler to establish a stable political authority. Their appeal was directed to the Varangians, a term used by the Slavs for Norsemen or Vikings, who were known for their military prowess and capacity for organization. In the year 862 CE, as recorded in the chronicle, 3 Varangian brothers Rurik, Cineas, and Truva responded to this invitation. They arrived with their retinues and settled in key strategic locations. Rurik in Ladoga and later Novgorod, Cineas in Beluzero, and Truva in Izborsk. The chronicle states that after the death of his brothers, Rurik consolidated control over these northern territories, establishing Novgorod as a primary power center. This event, known as the Calling of the Varangians, is the cornerstone of the Normanist theory, which posits a direct Scandinavian origin for the Rus state's ruling class. This interpretation is supported by a large body of archaeological evidence from these settlements, which shows a marked increase in Scandinavian material culture, including weapons, jewelry, and burial practices, coinciding with this period. Rurik's legacy was the establishment of a dynastic principle of rule, a significant departure from the more fluid, tribal leadership that preceded it. His lineage, the Rurikids, would go on to govern the various principalities of Kievan Rus for centuries. The dynasty's early years were characterized by military consolidation and the expansion of its control over the vital trade routes. Following Rurik's death, his kinsman Oleg would seize Kiev, uniting the northern and southern territories and formally establishing Kievan Rus as a coherent political entity under Rurikid rule. This dynastic framework provided a stable, albeit often contested, line of succession that was crucial for the state's long-term development. The Rurikids successfully integrated with a Slavic population, adopting their language and customs, but their Scandinavian origins provided a powerful foundation myth that was used to legitimize their authority over a diverse and expanding populace. The establishment of this dynasty marks the transition from a network of semi-independent towns to a unified, centralized state with a hereditary ruling class that would define the political landscape of Eastern Europe for generations. Following the death of Rurik, the political momentum of the newly formed northern Rus state was seized by his successor and kinsman, Oleg, who served as regent for Rurik's young son, Igor. Oleg's reign, as documented in the primary chronicle, is defined by a singular and decisive action: the monumental southward journey to consolidate control over the Dnieper River and its strategic territories. This campaign was not merely an act of conquest, but a calculated effort to unite the disparate Rus settlements into a single, cohesive political entity. Oleg's military expedition, commencing from Novgorod around 880 CE, moved systematically down the Volkhov and Dnieper rivers. Along this route, he subjugated various Slavic tribes, including the Kriviches and Radimich, integrating their territories and resources into his growing domain. The culmination of this journey was the strategic city of Kiev, which at the time was ruled by 2 other Varangian chieftains, Askold and Dir. The primary chronicle describes a cunning stratagem employed by Oleg to seize the city in 882 CE. He concealed his warriors in boats and approached Kiev under the guise of a peaceful merchant caravan. Once within reach, he lured Askold and Dir from the city walls, and, revealing his true purpose, executed them. This act of deception allowed Oleg to capture Kiev without a prolonged siege, minimizing destruction and securing the city's vital infrastructure intact. The capture of Kiev was a pivotal moment in the history of Eastern Europe. Geographically, it united the northern and southern sections of the great trade artery connecting the Baltic Sea to Byzantium, a route often referred to as the path from the Varangians to the Greeks. This unification placed the entire length of this crucial commercial highway under a single authority, allowing for the monopolization of trade and the establishment of a cohesive tribute system. Politically, the seizure of Kiev transformed the Rus state from a loose confederation of fortified towns into a true political entity with a defined capital. Oleg, recognizing the strategic superiority of the location, declared Kiev the mother of Rus cities, a title that cemented its status as the administrative and military heart of the new state. Oleg's subsequent reign saw Kievan Rus emerge as a recognized power on the international stage. His aggressive military campaigns, including a famous and largely successful naval assault on Constantinople in 907 CE, demonstrated the formidable strength of the new state. This campaign resulted in a favorable trade treaty with the Byzantine Empire, providing a formal economic and diplomatic foundation for the Rus. The consolidation of territories and the establishment of Kiev as a capital under Oleg's leadership fundamentally defined the geopolitical framework of Kievan Rus for centuries. He is thus remembered not merely as Rurik's successor, but as the de facto founder of the state, who created its geographical and political reality. The consolidation of Kievan Rus was fundamentally driven by its control over the path from the Varangians to the Greeks, a vital trade artery that served as the state's economic lifeline for centuries. This comprehensive network of rivers, lakes, and portages connected the Baltic Sea to the Black Sea, providing a direct channel for commerce between northern Europe and the wealthy, sophisticated markets of the Byzantine Empire in Constantinople. Its strategic importance was immense, transforming the Rus from a collection of isolated tribes into a significant player in the Eurasian economy. The goods flowing south along this route defined the Rus' commercial identity. From the northern forests, Varangian and Slavic merchants gathered valuable commodities. Furs from sable, mink, and squirrel, prized for their quality, were among the most sought-after exports. Honey, a staple sweetener, and beeswax, essential for candles and religious rituals in Byzantium, were also major sources of income. The capture and sale of slaves, often from defeated tribes or through punitive raids, constituted a significant and lucrative component of this trade. These raw materials and human resources were transported on long, shallow draft boats, meticulously navigated through the complex waterways, which included treacherous rapids and stretches where vessels had to be portaged overland. The trade route was not without its hazards. The southern steppes were dominated by various nomadic peoples, such as the Pechenegs, who posed a constant military threat to the merchant caravans. Securing the route required the Rus princes to field standing armies, garrison key settlements, and periodically launch punitive campaigns to keep the waterways open. This military necessity reinforced the power of the central authority in Kiev and provided a continuous source of revenue for the princes, which they used to fund their military forces and administrative networks. The final destination of this economic pipeline was Constantinople. The annual arrival of Rus fleets in the city's harbour, the Golden Horn, was a major event. Treaties, such as those negotiated by Oleg in 907 CE and Igor in 945 CE, formalized these commercial relationships and granted the Rus traders favorable terms, including exemptions from certain duties and access to imperial marketplaces. In exchange for their goods, the Rus received Byzantine luxury items, including fine silks, glassware, spices, and above all, the silver and gold that fueled their expanding economy. This influx of Byzantine wealth not only enriched the Rus elite, but also provided the financial and material basis for their cultural and political development, culminating in the adoption of Orthodox Christianity and the rise of a court culture modelled on that of Constantinople. The path from the Varangians to the Greeks was therefore more than a trade route. It was the essential economic and political foundation upon which the entire Kievan Rus state was built. The history of early Kievan Rus is intricately woven with the fate of the Khazar Khanate, a powerful Turkic state that held sway over the lower Volga region and the Pontic-Caspian steppes from the 7th to the 10th centuries CE. This relationship was a complex blend of tribute, commerce, and eventual military rivalry, with the Khazars initially acting as a dominant force over the nascent Rus state. The Khazar control of the Volga River, a major artery of the Eastern trade network, placed them in a position of authority over the Slavic and Varangian communities emerging to their north. Historical and archaeological evidence indicates that early Rus communities, particularly those in the northern regions, were tributary subjects of the Khazar Khanate. The primary chronicle explicitly mentions that the Slavic Polyaenian and Severin tribes paid tribute to the Khazars before the rise of the Rus princes. This relationship was not merely one of subjugation, it was also a channel for cultural and economic exchange. The Khazar capital, Itil, was a cosmopolitan center of trade where goods from the Islamic world, Byzantium, and the Eurasian steppes converged. Rus merchants, even as they paid tribute, benefited from the stability and commercial infrastructure provided by the Khazar state, gaining access to a vast network of markets and resources. The Rus' relationship with the Khazars began to shift in the late 9th and 10th centuries. With the consolidation of Kievan Rus under Oleg, the Rus began to redirect their economic and military focus. Oleg's establishment of Kiev as a capital unified the Dnieper trade route, providing an alternative to the Khazar-controlled Volga. The Rus started to grow in military strength and ambition, no longer content with being tributary subjects. This shift culminated in the decisive campaigns of Prince Sviatoslav the Brave. In the 960s CE, Sviatoslav launched a series of military campaigns that fundamentally altered the balance of power. His forces systematically targeted key Khazar strongholds. The capture of the Khazar fortress of Sarkel on the Don River was a major strategic blow. This was followed by the sacking of the capital, Itil, and the destruction of the Khazar political and military core. The collapse of the Khazar Khanate was a pivotal event that removed the primary geopolitical rival of Kievan Rus in the east. It not only freed the Rus from their tributary obligations, but also opened up the eastern trade routes and the lucrative Volga region to Rus control. This victory solidified Kievan Rus' position as the dominant regional power and provided the territorial and economic foundation for its future expansion. The reign of Igor, the son of Rurik, marks a transitional and often volatile period in the history of Kievan Rus, following the foundational consolidation under Oleg. While Oleg's rule was defined by expansion and diplomatic breakthroughs, Igor's time on the throne was characterized by the ongoing struggle to defend the state's borders and assert its authority against both nomadic threats and established empires. His military campaigns reveal a state that was powerful enough to project force across great distances, but still fragile in its internal cohesion and external relationships. One of the most persistent challenges Igor faced was the threat of the Pechenegs, a nomadic Turkic people who had established themselves on the Pontic steppes. These highly mobile horse archers posed a constant danger to the southern borders of Kievan Rus, raiding settlements and disrupting the crucial Dnieper trade route. Igor's military actions against the Pechenegs were primarily defensive, aimed at protecting his territory and maintaining the flow of commerce. The primary chronicle records a battle between Igor's forces and the Pechenegs in 920 CE, which, while not a decisive victory, demonstrated the Rus' determination to defend its borders. These continuous skirmishes necessitated the maintenance of a military presence on the steppe frontier, diverting resources and manpower from other endeavors. Igor's most ambitious military actions were directed toward the Byzantine Empire, following the aggressive precedent set by Oleg. The first major campaign took place in 941 CE, when Igor launched a large-scale naval assault on Constantinople. His fleet of several hundred boats filled with warriors, sailed across the Black Sea and attempted to attack the Byzantine capital. This raid was met with a devastating response. The Byzantine navy, armed with Greek fire, a highly effective and secret incendiary weapon, inflicted a catastrophic defeat on the Rus fleet. The majority of Igor's ships were destroyed, and his forces were either captured or forced to retreat. Undaunted by this failure, Igor mounted a second campaign against Byzantium in 944 CE. This time, his strategy was more cautious and land-based. He assembled a vast army of Rus, Varangians, and allied Pecheneg mercenaries and advanced toward the Danube River, signaling his intent to march on Constantinople. The Byzantine Emperor, Romanos I Lecapennios, seeking to avoid a costly and destructive land war, opted for a diplomatic solution. He sent emissaries with rich gifts and offers of a new trade treaty, which Igor accepted. The Treaty of 944 CE, though less favorable to the Rus than Oleg's previous agreement, formalized their commercial rights and reaffirmed the diplomatic relationship between the two states. Igor's campaigns, therefore, illustrate the paradoxical nature of Kievan Rus's power in this era. The state possessed sufficient military strength to launch large-scale operations against a major empire and to defend its borders against nomadic incursions. However, the outcomes of these campaigns, a crushing naval defeat and a diplomatic resolution born of caution, reveal the limits of this power. Kievan Rus was a growing force, but it was still a young, and in many respects, fragile state, not yet capable of dominating its more established and sophisticated neighbors. The reign of Igor, while marked by external military campaigns, met its definitive end through a violent internal challenge to the very foundation of Kievan Rus's power, the Drevlian Revolt of 945 CE. This event was a pivotal moment, highlighting the fragile nature of Rus authority over the diverse and often unwilling Slavic tribes, and underscoring the difficulties of transitioning from a tribute-based system to a centralized state. The Drevlians, a powerful Slavic tribe inhabiting the forested lands west of the Dnieper, had long been tributary subjects of the Rus. While they paid their dues, their autonomy remained a significant political and military consideration for the Kievan princes. The revolt was precipitated by Igor's avarice and the breakdown of a conventional tribute-gathering system known as polyeudy. Under this system, the Rus princes would travel annually with their retinues to various tribes to collect tribute, which was typically paid in furs, honey, and other forest products. In the autumn of 945, having already completed the polyeudy and collected the required tribute from the Drevlians, Igor made the fatal decision to return with a smaller contingent of his personal guard, demanding an additional exorbitant payment. This act of greed violated the established custom and was perceived by the Drevlians as a breach of the unwritten political contract between ruler and ruled. The Drevlian leaders, including their prince Mal, convened a council to address Igor's unprecedented demand. Their decision was not merely to refuse payment, but to eliminate the source of the injustice itself. According to the primary chronicle, they concluded that if a wolf gets into the habit of taking sheep, the entire flock will be destroyed unless the wolf is killed. The Drevlians ambushed Igor and his small band near their capital, Iskorostan. The Rus warriors were swiftly overcome, and Igor himself was subjected to a brutal and symbolic execution. The chronicle recounts that he was tied between two bent-over birch trees, which were then released, tearing his body in half. This gruesome act served as a powerful message. The Drevlians would not tolerate the unchecked tyranny of a prince whose greed threatened their traditional way of life. The death of Igor had immediate and profound political consequences. It demonstrated that Kievan Rus's authority was not yet absolute, and that the underlying tribal structures remained a potent force. The Drevlian revolt plunged the state into a crisis of leadership. As Igor's successor was his young son, Igor, and the regency fell to his widow, Olga, the revolt forced the Kievan court to confront the systemic flaws of its tribute collection methods. It was a catalyst for a fundamental change in Rus governance, leading Olga to implement a new, fixed system of tribute and administration that would bring the Drevlian and other rebellious tribes under firm, centralized control. The Drevlian revolt, which culminated in the brutal death of Prince Igor, plunged Kievan Rus into a succession crisis and a power vacuum. With Igor's son a minor, the regency fell to his widow, Princess Olga. Her reign is defined not by external conquest, but by a methodical and merciless retribution against the Drevlians, an act of calculated statecraft that not only avenged her husband, but also fundamentally transformed Rus governance. Olga's actions were a series of political and military maneuvers designed to crush the rebellion, eliminate the Drevlian leadership, and firmly establish the supremacy of the Kievan throne. The Drevlians, believing the Rus state was weakened, sent an embassy to Olga, offering her marriage to their prince, Mal. This offer was a brazen attempt to absorb the Kievan throne and legitimize the rebellion. Olga's response, as recounted in the primary chronicle, was a masterclass in political deception. She feigned acceptance, inviting the Drevlian envoys to Kiev. Her vengeance, however, was swift and brutal. She had the first group of envoys buried alive in their boats. A second group was invited, then locked in a bathhouse which was set ablaze. These acts of treachery, while legendary, demonstrate a level of cunning and ruthlessness that solidified her authority among her own people and instilled terror in her enemies. Olga's third act of vengeance was her most elaborate. She traveled to the Drevlian capital, Iskorostan, with a small retinue to perform a memorial feast for her husband. After the Drevlians had become intoxicated, Olga's warriors massacred them. With the Drevlian leadership and a significant portion of their military force eliminated, Olga turned to a new and innovative form of warfare. The chronicle recounts her siege of Iskorostan and her demand for a seemingly minor tribute: 3 pigeons and 3 sparrows from each household. After receiving the birds, she had her soldiers attach smouldering pieces of sulfur to their legs. The birds, released, flew back to their nests in the thatched roofs of the city, setting the town ablaze. The destruction of Iskorostan effectively ended the rebellion and eliminated the Drevlians as a military and political threat. Following her vengeance, Olga implemented a new system of governance known as the Ustavi statutes and Uroki fixed payments. This administrative reform was a direct response to the polyudi system that had led to Igor's death. Instead of a prince randomly collecting tribute, Olga established fixed collection points and a regular schedule for payments. This provided the state with a stable, predictable source of revenue while curtailing the avarice of individual princes. These fixed payments and administrative districts, known as pogosti, laid the groundwork for a more centralized state bureaucracy. Olga's ruthless but calculated actions thus did more than simply avenge her husband. They transformed Kievan Rus from a loose collection of tribute-paying tribes into a nascent centralized state with a defined administrative framework. The reign of Princess Olga, following her brutal consolidation of power, marked a period of profound transition for Kievan Rus, most notably for its first major step toward Christianization. While her early rule was defined by a ruthless pragmatism, her later years were characterized by a sophisticated diplomatic engagement with the Byzantine Empire and a personal spiritual journey that would have lasting geopolitical consequences. Olga's efforts to establish a formal relationship with Byzantium were rooted in the recognition that a mature state required more than just military prowess. It needed cultural and religious legitimacy. In 957 CE, Olga undertook a historic diplomatic mission to Constantinople, the heart of the Orthodox Christian world. This journey was an unprecedented event for a Rus ruler. The primary chronicle and Byzantine sources, particularly the writings of Emperor Constantine VII Porphyrogenitos, provide details of her visit. Olga was received with great honor and ceremony at the imperial court. Her presence there was a testament to the growing power and importance of Kievan Rus on the international stage. The most significant event of this visit was Olga's personal baptism into the Christian faith. She was baptized by Emperor Constantine VII himself, with the Patriarch of Constantinople serving as her godfather. She took the Christian name Helena, a name with great symbolic resonance, as it was the name of the mother of the first Christian Roman emperor, Constantine the Great. This conversion was a highly calculated and strategic move. By personally adopting Christianity from the very source of Orthodox power, Olga sought to elevate her status and that of her state in the eyes of Byzantium. It was a clear signal that Kievan Rus, despite its pagan roots, was seeking to join the community of civilized Christian nations. Despite her personal conversion, Olga's efforts to Christianize Kievan Rus were met with considerable resistance. She failed to convince her son, Sviatoslav, to follow her example. He famously argued that such a conversion would alienate his warrior retinue, who would mock him if he abandoned their traditional pagan beliefs. The Rus aristocracy and a significant portion of the populace remained fiercely committed to their ancestral polytheistic religion. Consequently, Olga's conversion remained largely a personal and symbolic affair during her lifetime. She built some of the first Christian churches in Kiev and sought to spread the new faith, but her influence was limited. The true mass Christianization of Kievan Rus would not occur until the reign of her grandson, Vladimir. Nevertheless, Olga's pilgrimage to Constantinople and her embrace of Christianity were a crucial first step, paving the way for her descendants to forge a lasting religious and cultural bond with the Byzantine Empire. The reign of Sviatoslav, son of Igor and Olga, marked a profound departure from the political consolidation of his predecessors, ushering in an era of relentless military expansion. Unlike his mother, the Christian princess Olga, Sviatoslav remained a devout pagan throughout his life. He is historically defined as the quintessential warrior prince, preferring the life of a soldier on campaign to the comforts of the Kievan court. His military fervor and strategic vision led to an unprecedented expansion of Kievan Rus borders and fundamentally reshaped the geopolitical landscape of Eastern Europe. Sviatoslav's first major objective was the Khazar Khanate, a long-standing rival that controlled crucial trade routes in the east and had previously held sway over some Slavic tribes. In a series of decisive campaigns beginning around 965 CE, Sviatoslav's forces systematically dismantled the Khazar state. He captured and destroyed key Khazar fortresses, including Sarkel on the Don River, and, most critically, the capital city of Itil on the Volga. The collapse of the Khazar Khanate was a monumental victory that removed the primary eastern rival of Kievan Rus, opening up the Volga trade route and the surrounding steppe territories to Rus influence and control. This victory solidified Kievan Rus's position as the dominant regional power. Following his success against the Khazars, Sviatoslav turned his attention to other neighbors. He launched campaigns against the Volga Bulgars, a Turkic state on the Middle Volga, and subjugated various Slavic and Finno-Ugric tribes, further extending the territorial reach of Kievan Rus. His reputation as a formidable military leader spread, and he began to attract a large retinue of warriors eager to join his campaigns. Sviatoslav's most ambitious and controversial ventures, however, were in the Balkans. Drawn into the region initially as a Byzantine ally to fight the Bulgars, Sviatoslav quickly developed his own imperial ambitions. He saw the potential to establish a new Rus empire centered on the Danube River. He transferred his capital to Pereslavets and began an aggressive campaign against his former Byzantine allies, leading to open war with Emperor John I Tzimiskes. This conflict, fought in the late 960s and early 970s, pitted the Rus' formidable infantry and cavalry against the disciplined, technologically advanced forces of Byzantium. After a series of hard-fought battles and a prolonged siege of the fortress of Dorostelon, Sviatoslav was defeated and forced to abandon his Balkan ambitions. His return journey to Kiev proved to be his final campaign. In 972 CE, his forces were ambushed by a Pecheneg force on the Dnieper Rapids, a common hazard of the trade route. Sviatoslav, the perennial warrior, was killed in the fighting. His skull was reportedly fashioned into a drinking cup by the Pecheneg Khan, a final testament to his warrior status. The destruction of the Khazar Khanate stands as one of the most significant and lasting achievements of Prince Sviatoslav's reign. This decisive victory not only avenged a long-standing tributary relationship, but fundamentally altered the geopolitical landscape of Eastern Europe by removing Kievan Rus's primary eastern rival. The Khazars, a powerful Turkic state, had for centuries controlled the lower Volga region and a vast network of eastern trade, often holding sway over the Slavic tribes that would later form the core of Kievan Rus. Sviatoslav's campaign, which unfolded in the 960s CE, was a methodical and strategic military operation. He did not engage in a single decisive battle, but rather targeted the key centers of Khazar power. His forces first moved down the Volga River, a strategic waterway that was the economic backbone of the Khazar state. The campaign was notable for its use of both riverine transport and land-based forces, demonstrating a sophisticated combined arms approach to warfare. The Rus army was composed of Slavic and Varangian warriors who were well adapted to both forest and river combat, allowing them to effectively neutralize Khazar defenses. The first major blow to the Khazars was the capture of their fortress city of Sarkel on the Don River. Sarkel, meaning White Fortress in Turkic, was a formidable structure of limestone bricks and was a crucial defensive and commercial hub for the Khanate. Sviatoslav's forces besieged and captured the fortress, effectively severing Khazar control over the Don River trade and establishing a Rus presence in the region. This victory was a major strategic success that weakened the Khazar military and economic foundation. Following the fall of Sarkel, Sviatoslav advanced on the Khazar heartland. The culmination of his campaign was the sacking of Itil, the Khazar capital, located on the Volga River. Itil was a bustling, multi-ethnic trade city, and its destruction was a catastrophic event for the Khanate. Archaeological evidence confirms the widespread destruction and abandonment of Khazar settlements in this period, corroborating the accounts of the primary chronicle and other sources. The collapse of the central Khazar authority, its military and its trade network was total. The consequences of the Khazar collapse were profound. It removed the main barrier to Rus expansion in the east, providing Kievan Rus with unfettered access to the Volga trade route and the vast resources of the steppe territories. This victory solidified Kievan Rus' position as the dominant regional power, allowing for its continued political and economic expansion. While the long-term vacuum created by the Khazars' defeat would later lead to new nomadic threats, Sviatoslav's campaign stands as a defining moment, one that transitioned Kievan Rus from a regional power to a state with significant influence over the geopolitical destiny of Eastern Europe. The reign of Prince Sviatoslav was characterized by a series of relentless military campaigns that extended beyond the definitive destruction of the Khazar Khanate. His ambition to create a vast, land-based empire necessitated continuous warfare against various nomadic and semi-sedentary groups that bordered Kievan Rus. These conflicts, while perhaps less historically monumental than the Khazar campaign, were crucial in establishing Rus dominance and defining its territorial limits. One of Sviatoslav's military objectives was the subjugation of the Volga Bulgars. This state, a powerful trading entity situated on the middle Volga River, controlled a crucial commercial hub connecting the Rus with Central Asia and the Islamic world. Following his victory over the Khazars, Sviatoslav's forces targeted the Volga Bulgars to secure the entire length of the eastern trade route. Historical sources indicate a military campaign that resulted in a decisive Rus victory, though not a total annexation of Bulgar territory. This campaign effectively neutralized the Bulgars as a competing economic and military power, solidifying Rus control over the lucrative trade networks of the Volga. Sviatoslav also had to contend with the Magyars, a nomadic group that had once controlled territories on the steppes near the Dnieper River. By the time of Sviatoslav's reign, the Magyars had largely migrated westward into the Carpathian Basin, pushed by the pressures of other nomadic groups. However, their earlier presence and interaction with the Slavic tribes were a significant factor in the region's geopolitical history. Sviatoslav's conflicts with the Magyars, while less documented than his other campaigns, were part of the broader effort to assert Rus authority over the steppe frontier and manage the constant flux of nomadic populations. The most persistent and formidable threat to Kievan Rus was the Pechenegs. This nomadic Turkic confederation dominated the Pontic steppes and posed a continuous military challenge to the Rus state's southern borders. Their highly mobile forces frequently raided Rus settlements, disrupted trade along the Dnieper, and required constant vigilance. Sviatoslav's campaigns against the Pechenegs were not always large-scale battles, but a series of skirmishes and punitive expeditions aimed at maintaining order and protecting the trade routes. His mastery of steppe warfare, a synthesis of Varangian and Slavic tactics with an understanding of nomadic mobility, was honed in these conflicts. However, the Pechenegs' ability to remain a significant threat is underscored by Sviatoslav's final moments. In 972 CE, while returning from his Balkan campaigns, Sviatoslav and his retinue were ambushed by a Pecheneg force at the Dnieper Rapids, a narrow and dangerous choke point. The attack resulted in the death of the prince, a testament to the Pechenegs' enduring power and the precarious nature of Rus' control over the steppes. These campaigns against the Volga, Bulgars, Magyars, and Pechenegs collectively demonstrate Sviatoslav's military prowess and his ambitious vision. His reign was a period of intense land-based expansion, which, while extending the state's influence, also left Kievan Rus vulnerable to the very forces he sought to conquer. Prince Sviatoslav's military ambitions were not confined to the steppes of Eastern Europe. They extended southward into the Balkans, where his aggressive campaigns brought Kievan Rus into direct and consequential conflict with the sophisticated and powerful Byzantine Empire. This period, beginning in the late 960s CE, represents a pivotal moment in Rus history, showcasing its growing military strength while simultaneously highlighting the formidable diplomatic and military might of Byzantium. The outcome of these campaigns would ultimately force the Rus to abandon their aspirations for a Danubian empire and would lay the groundwork for a different, more lasting relationship with Constantinople. Sviatoslav's involvement in the Balkans began through a calculated diplomatic move by the Byzantine Emperor Nikephoros II Phocas. Seeking to neutralize the threat of the First Bulgarian Empire, the Byzantines hired Sviatoslav as an ally, offering him a substantial payment in gold to invade Bulgaria. In 968 CE, Sviatoslav launched a swift and devastating campaign, capturing the Bulgarian capital of Preslav and establishing a strong presence on the Danube River. However, Sviatoslav, captivated by the region's wealth and strategic location, quickly developed his own imperial ambitions. He saw the potential to relocate his capital from Kiev to Pereyaslawets, a city on the Danube, and establish a new pan-Slavic empire. This shift from ally to rival alarmed the Byzantines. Sviatoslav's refusal to withdraw his forces from Bulgaria and his subsequent attacks on Byzantine territories led to a full-scale war. The new emperor, John I Tzimiskes, a seasoned military commander, recognized the existential threat Sviatoslav posed and mobilized the full might of the Byzantine army. The conflict that followed was a clash of two very different military doctrines. Sviatoslav's forces, composed of a mixture of Rus, Pechenegs, and subjugated Bulgars, were formidable in close-quarters combat, but lacked the technological advantages of the Byzantines, particularly in siege warfare and heavy armor. The Byzantines, in turn, possessed highly disciplined, professional armies, sophisticated siege engines, and a mastery of strategy and logistics. The war culminated in the prolonged siege of Dorostolon in 971 CE. Sviatoslav's army was trapped within the fortress, facing a relentless Byzantine assault. The siege was a brutal and costly affair for both sides. But the Rus were gradually worn down by a combination of starvation and superior Byzantine military technology. After a decisive battle outside the walls, Sviatoslav was forced to negotiate a peace treaty. The terms were harsh. Sviatoslav and his surviving warriors were allowed to return to Kievan Rus, but they had to pledge not to attack Byzantine territories again and to abandon their ambitions for a Danubian empire. This defeat, while not a total annihilation, was a major strategic setback. It demonstrated that Kievan Rus, despite its growing strength, was not yet capable of overpowering a sophisticated empire like Byzantium, and that its future lay not in military conquest in the Balkans, but in consolidation at home. The death of Prince Sviatoslav in 972 CE at the Dnieper Rapids marked the abrupt end of his era of military expansion and plunged Kievan Rus into its first major succession crisis. Sviatoslav's final act of dividing the Rus lands among his three sons Yaropolk, Oleg, and Vladimir was a fateful decision that, in the absence of a clear system of succession, ignited a period of brutal internecine conflict. This civil war, fought between 972 and 980 CE, was a critical turning point in Rus history, exposing the fragility of the state's political framework and ultimately setting the stage for a new, more centralized era under Vladimir. Sviatoslav had assigned the key principalities to his sons. Yaropolk, the eldest, received Kiev. Oleg was given the Drevlian lands, and Vladimir, the youngest, was sent to rule Novgorod. This arrangement, based on geographical separation, created a decentralized power structure that was ripe for conflict. The first signs of strife emerged shortly after their father's death. Yaropolk, ruling from the capital in Kiev, began to assert his authority over his brothers, while Oleg and Vladimir, from their respective distant power bases, sought to protect their autonomy. The initial conflict erupted between Yaropolk and Oleg in 977 CE, triggered by the murder of one of Yaropolk's vassals by Oleg's men. In the ensuing hostilities, Oleg was killed. His forces were defeated and his lands were absorbed by Yaropolk, a victory that initially consolidated power in the hands of the eldest son. Vladimir, ruling in Novgorod, viewed Yaropolk's actions as a direct threat to his own position. Fearing a similar fate, he fled across the Baltic to Scandinavia, seeking the aid of Varangian mercenaries. This exile was a calculated strategic move. In 978 CE, Vladimir returned to Kievan Rus with a large force of Varangian warriors, determined to reclaim his inheritance and avenge his brother. He first marched on Novgorod, where he re-established his authority, and then launched a campaign to seize Kiev. His forces successfully captured the city of Polotsk on the way to Kiev, where he brutally killed its prince Rogvolod and married his daughter Rogneda. This act, while ruthless, was a demonstration of Vladimir's resolve and an effort to secure his new territories through political marriage. The war for Kiev culminated in the siege and capture of the city in 980 CE. Yaropolk was killed, and Vladimir, having eliminated his rivals, became the sole ruler of Kievan Rus. This period of bloody conflict was a brutal but necessary process for the state. It demonstrated that the decentralized system of succession was unworkable and that a unified Rus required a single, powerful ruler. Vladimir's victory marked the end of the Rus' first civil war and ushered in a new era of consolidation. Having witnessed the chaos that internecine strife could bring, Vladimir would spend his reign establishing a more centralized and stable state, culminating in his momentous decision to adopt Christianity. The reign of Vladimir I, known to history as Vladimir the Great, marked a pivotal and transformative period for Kievan Rus. His ascent to power was a brutal process, culminating in his victory in the Rus' first civil war in 980 CE, where he eliminated his brothers Yaropolk and Oleg to become the sole ruler. Having secured his political authority through military force, Vladimir embarked on a systematic campaign to consolidate the disparate Slavic territories and establish a unified state. His initial efforts focused on expanding and securing the borders, subjugating various Slavic and Finno-Ugric tribes, and fending off the persistent threat of the Pechenegs on the southern frontier. In his early years, Vladimir was a devout pagan, and his rule was initially characterized by a fervent revival of the traditional Slavic religion. He sought to create a state-sponsored pantheon of gods to provide a unified religious identity for his diverse subjects. In Kiev, he had a temple constructed, dedicated to a collection of Slavic deities, including Perun, the god of thunder and war, and Mokosh, a goddess associated with fertility. This act was a deliberate political maneuver. By elevating these pagan gods and mandating their worship, Vladimir intended to use religion as a tool for political centralization, a strategy not uncommon among rulers of the era. He and his retinue participated in elaborate pagan rituals and sacrifices, seeking divine favor for his military campaigns and political endeavors. However, this pagan revival proved inadequate for unifying a state with such diverse cultural and ethnic backgrounds. The pagan pantheon was regional and tribal in nature, making a unified state religion difficult to achieve. Furthermore, the Rus' growing diplomatic and commercial ties with neighboring powers, particularly the Christian Byzantine Empire and the Islamic Volga Bulgars, exposed Vladimir and his court to more sophisticated and monotheistic religions. The Rus had been a pagan state, but its elite had long been aware of the monotheistic faiths of its most important trading partners. The continuous flow of merchants, missionaries, and diplomats into Kiev brought with it new ideas about religion, law, and social organization. Vladimir's reign in this period was a transition from a pagan warrior state to a power seeking a more stable and legitimate identity. His early paganism, while a genuine attempt at religious unification, was ultimately a temporary phase. The limitations of tribal religion in a multi-ethnic state, combined with the geopolitical advantages offered by a monotheistic faith, would soon lead him to a momentous decision that would forever change the course of Kievan Rus' history. This transition laid the groundwork for his famous choice of faith, a decision that would redefine Rus' identity and its place in the world. The momentous decision by Prince Vladimir to abandon paganism and adopt a monotheistic faith is immortalized in the primary chronicle as the choice of faith, a legendary narrative that, while embellished, reflects a complex and calculated geopolitical and cultural process. Faced with the limitations of a pagan religion for a multi-ethnic state, Vladimir sought a faith that could provide not only a unified spiritual identity, but also a lasting political and cultural legitimacy. The story recounts how Vladimir, in the late 980s CE, dispatched envoys to neighboring lands to investigate their respective religions. According to the Chronicle, Rus envoys were first sent to the Volga Bulgars to observe Islam. The envoys reported on the Bulgars' strict prohibitions on alcohol and pork, which they found culturally unappealing. This social incompatibility was a major factor in their rejection. The envoys then visited the Khazars, a significant portion of whom had converted to Judaism. While the Khazar faith was presented as a viable option, the envoys were reportedly unimpressed with a religion whose adherents had lost their state and land, suggesting a divine disfavor that made it an unsuitable choice for a powerful and expanding Rus state. The envoys' evaluation of Western Christianity, as practiced by the Germans, was also negative. The Chronicles account dismisses the rituals and services of the Western Church as uninspired and lacking in grandeur. This report highlighted a growing cultural and aesthetic divide between the Rus and Western Europe, where the focus on ritual and solemnity was perceived as lacking the celebratory and visually rich experience that would appeal to the Rus people. The climax of the choice of faith narrative occurred with the envoys' visit to Constantinople, the heart of the Byzantine Empire. Their report on the divine liturgy at the Hagia Sophia was overwhelmingly positive. They described the service as a sublime and awe-inspiring experience, stating, "We knew not whether we were in heaven or on earth. For on earth there is no such splendor or such beauty, and we are at a loss how to describe it. We only know that God dwells there among men." This emotional and aesthetic response was a crucial factor in the Rus' decision. Byzantine Orthodoxy, with its rich liturgical tradition, magnificent iconography, and grand architecture, presented a religion that was not only politically prestigious, but also deeply appealing to the Rus elite. Beyond these legendary accounts, the choice of Byzantine Orthodoxy was a highly strategic one. The long-standing commercial and diplomatic ties between Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire provided a natural and pre-existing channel for religious and cultural exchange. Adopting the faith of their most important trading partner and political neighbor offered immediate geopolitical benefits. It provided the Rus with a new, unified legal and administrative framework, as well as access to the wealth of Byzantine culture, art, and literacy. The choice of faith was therefore a monumental act of statecraft that solidified Kievan Rus' place in the world, forever linking its political and cultural destiny with the Orthodox Christian East. The political and cultural considerations of Vladimir's choice of faith culminated in the monumental event of the baptism of Rus in 988 CE, a strategic act of statecraft that forever linked the Rus state to the Byzantine cultural sphere. This was not a passive conversion, but a decisive and forceful act initiated by the prince to secure a new religious and political identity for his realm. The process was meticulously planned, beginning with a military campaign designed to force a marriage alliance with the Byzantine imperial family, an unprecedented diplomatic feat for a pagan ruler. In 988 CE, Vladimir launched a siege on the Byzantine city of Chersonesus, modern-day Sevastopol in Crimea. This was a highly strategic move. Chersonesus was a crucial Byzantine outpost on the northern Black Sea coast, and its capture demonstrated Vladimir's formidable military power. The siege forced the hand of Emperor Basil II, who was at the time facing internal rebellions and needed military assistance. Vladimir offered his support in exchange for the hand of the emperor's sister, Princess Anna, in marriage. Such a union with a member of the imperial family was an extraordinary honor that would confer immense prestige and legitimacy upon the Rus prince. However, Basil II set a condition. Vladimir and his entire realm must be baptized into the Orthodox Christian faith. Vladimir accepted these terms, and he was baptized in Chersonesus. According to the chronicle, he emerged from the baptism cured of a sudden blindness, a narrative detail that reinforced the divine nature of the event. Following his baptism, Vladimir married Princess Anna, an act that formalized the political and religious alliance between Kievan Rus and the Byzantine Empire. With his new wife and a retinue of Byzantine priests, he returned to Kiev in triumph, bringing with him religious icons, sacred vessels, and the cultural foundations of the new faith. Upon his return, Vladimir initiated a top-down conversion of his people. He ordered the destruction of the pagan idols, most notably the great idol of Perun that had stood on a hill overlooking Kiev, which was tied to a horse's tail and dragged through the city before being thrown into the Dnieper River. Following this symbolic act, Vladimir commanded the entire populace of Kiev to assemble at the Dnieper for a mass baptism. The chronicle describes how people, from the highest nobles to the lowest commoners, entered the river to be baptized by the Byzantine clergy. This event, while a state-enforced conversion, marks the formal adoption of Orthodox Christianity as the state religion of Kievan Rus. It provided the Rus with a new, unified religious identity, access to Byzantine law and literacy, and a lasting cultural and spiritual connection to Constantinople. The baptism of Rus, orchestrated by Prince Vladimir in 988 CE, was not merely a ceremonial act, but a catalyst for a profound and wide-ranging transformation of Rus society, with lasting consequences in the political, social, and cultural spheres. The adoption of Byzantine orthodoxy provided Kievan Rus with a unified state ideology, a sophisticated administrative framework, and a rich cultural identity that replaced the fragmented nature of its pagan past. This conversion was a top-down process that had an immediate and visible impact on the state's development. Politically, the new faith provided the Rus princes with a powerful tool for centralizing authority. The concept of a single, omnipotent God resonated with the prince's desire to be the sole, supreme ruler of his land. The Byzantine notion of a divinely sanctioned monarchical power provided a new source of legitimacy for the Rurikid dynasty, replacing the older, more tribal forms of leadership. The newly established church, headed by a metropolitan appointed from Constantinople, became a key partner in governance. Clergy and bishops were not only spiritual leaders, but also advisors to the prince, administrators of justice, and participants in diplomatic missions, strengthening the state's bureaucratic and institutional capacities. Socially, Christianity introduced a new moral and legal framework that complemented the existing Slavic customary laws. The Church promoted a new ethical code, emphasizing concepts of mercy, charity, and social welfare that were not central to the pagan worldview. The first hospitals and monastic communities were established, providing care for the poor and sick. Literacy, once limited to a few merchants and foreign traders, began to spread with the introduction of the Cyrillic alphabet. This was a crucial development that enabled the translation of liturgical books, legal codes, and historical chronicles, laying the foundation for a written Rus culture. Culturally, the impact was immediate and dramatic. The pagan idols were destroyed, and new stone churches were constructed to replace the wooden shrines. The first of these, the Church of the Tithes in Kiev, was built with the direct support of Vladimir, and was a clear symbol of the new state religion. Modelled on Byzantine architectural styles, these churches were adorned with intricate mosaics, frescoes, and icons, introducing the Rus populace to a new aesthetic and artistic tradition. The adoption of Orthodox ritual, music, and iconography fundamentally reshaped the Rus' artistic and spiritual life, establishing a strong and lasting cultural connection to the Byzantine world. The Cyrillic script, originally developed for Old Church Slavonic, became the medium for Rus's own written traditions, allowing for the creation of literary works and the preservation of historical records. The new faith, therefore, was the primary engine of modernization, transforming Kievan Rus from a regional pagan power into a cohesive, centralized, and culturally sophisticated state within the Christian community of Europe. The reign of Yaroslav I, known as Yaroslav the Wise, stands as the zenith of Kievan Rus's power and cultural influence, a period of unprecedented consolidation and prosperity. His ascent to power, much like his father Vladimir's, was not immediate but required a prolonged and brutal civil war. Following Vladimir's death in 1015 CE, Yaroslav fought a fierce struggle for the Kievan throne against his brothers, most notably Sviatopolk the Accursed. Yaroslav's definitive victory at the Battle of the Alta River in 1019 CE, secured with the aid of Varangian mercenaries, cemented his position as the sole ruler and brought a much-needed period of political stability after years of internecine conflict. With his political authority secured, Yaroslav embarked on a series of military campaigns that firmly established Kievan Rus as a major power in Europe. His most significant military achievement was his victory against the Pechenegs. These nomadic raiders had been a persistent threat to the southern frontiers for over a century, constantly disrupting trade and raiding settlements. In 1036 CE, Yaroslav's forces inflicted a crushing defeat on the Pechenegs at the walls of Kiev, a victory so decisive that it effectively ended the nomadic threat to the heartland of Kievan Rus for decades. He also launched successful campaigns against the Poles and the Baltic tribes, expanding and securing the western and northern borders of his realm. His strategic military prowess was further demonstrated by his firm defense against a Byzantine naval attack on the Rus in 1043 CE. Beyond his military accomplishments, Yaroslav's influence was most profoundly felt in his diplomatic and administrative achievements. He skillfully used dynastic marriages to integrate Kievan Rus into the political fabric of Europe. His daughter Anna married King Henry I of Elizabeth, married King Harold III of Norway, and Anastasia married the future King Andrew I of Hungary. These matrimonial alliances not only secured powerful political connections, but also conferred immense prestige upon the Rurikid dynasty, positioning Kievan Rus as an equal among the Christian kingdoms of the West. Domestically, Yaroslav's reign was a period of legal and cultural advancement. He is credited with the compilation of the Russkaya Pravda, Rus's Law, the first written legal code of Kievan Rus. This legal text, which codified existing customary law and integrated Byzantine legal principles, provided a unified legal framework for the state, a crucial step in the development of a centralized government. Yaroslav was a fervent patron of the arts, education, and religion. He ordered the construction of numerous churches, monasteries, and schools throughout his realm. The most famous of these is the Cathedral of St. Sophia in Kiev, a magnificent architectural achievement modelled on the great Byzantine churches and adorned with exquisite mosaics and frescoes. This period saw the flourishing of literacy and the copying of Greek liturgical and legal texts, fostering a rich written culture. Yaroslav's reign, therefore, represents the culmination of the work of his predecessors, transforming Kievan Rus from a regional military power into a sophisticated, well-ordered, and respected state that stood on equal footing with its European neighbours. The enduring legacy of Yaroslav the Wise is arguably his administrative and legal reforms, most notably the compilation of the Russkaya Pravda, or Rus's Law. This document stands as the first written legal code of Kievan Rus, and a monumental achievement in its own right, representing a crucial step in the state's transition from a collection of tribal entities to a centralized, codified government. The creation of a single unified body of law was a direct response to the need for political and social stability, which had been repeatedly threatened by civil strife and a reliance on fragmented customary laws. The Russkaya Pravda was not a single document, but a collection of legal texts developed over a period of time, with its core being the Pravda Yaroslava. This initial section of the code was a synthesis of pre-existing Slavic customary laws, which were transmitted orally with new legal concepts introduced under Yaroslav's authority. A key feature of this early law was its focus on mitigating and regulating blood feuds, a common practice in tribal societies. The code replaced the indiscriminate vengeance of the blood feud with a system of financial compensation, or vira, for specific crimes such as murder. This institutionalization of monetary fines was a significant move toward a more orderly and just society, with the state acting as the ultimate arbiter of disputes rather than individual families. A later, more extensive version of the code, known as the extended Russkaya Pravda, further developed these legal principles and introduced new concepts influenced by Byzantine law. These influences are most apparent in the code's regulation of property rights, inheritance, and contracts. The integration of Byzantine legal traditions provided Kievan Rus with a more sophisticated legal vocabulary and a framework for addressing the complexities of a developing economy and social hierarchy. The code, for instance, carefully distinguished between the social status of individual princes, boyars, freemen, and slavesand, prescribed different penalties for crimes committed against them, reflecting the stratified nature of Rus society. The Russkaya Pravda was more than a list of laws. It was a political statement. Its compilation was a powerful demonstration of the prince's authority as the source of law and order, reinforcing the legitimacy of the Kievan throne. The very act of writing down the law using the newly adopted Cyrillic alphabet was a symbol of cultural maturity and political centralization, bringing the Rus into the European tradition of codified jurisprudence. While its application was likely inconsistent and its scope limited to the dominant social classes, the Russkaya Pravda provided the foundational legal text that would be a cornerstone of Rus and, later, Russian law for centuries, serving as a testament to Yaroslav's vision of a well-ordered and unified state. The reign of Yaroslav the Wise, already marked by military and legal achievements, reached its cultural zenith with the construction of the Cathedral of St. Sophia in Kiev. This monumental architectural undertaking, commenced in the 1030s CE, was more than just a place of worship. It was a powerful symbol of Kievan Rus's newfound cultural sophistication, its adoption of Byzantine traditions, and its ambition to stand as an equal among the Christian kingdoms of Europe. The cathedral's design, its decoration, and its scale were all calculated to project an image of a powerful, wealthy, and devout state. The architecture of the Cathedral of St. Sophia was a direct and deliberate imitation of the great churches of Constantinople, particularly the original Hagia Sophia. This was no coincidence. By modelling their greatest church on the architectural masterpieces of the Byzantine Empire, the Rus were signalling their full integration into the Orthodox Christian world, and their claim to be a legitimate successor to the Byzantine cultural legacy. The cathedral's central dome, surrounded by a complex arrangement of smaller domes and apses, created a dramatic and awe-inspiring interior space. The use of brick, stone, and mortar, a departure from the traditional Slavic reliance on wood, demonstrated the Rus' ability to master new building techniques and mobilize the labor and resources required for such a massive project. The interior of the cathedral was its most magnificent feature. adorned with intricate mosaics and frescoes crafted by Byzantine masters and their Rus apprentices. The mosaics, made from colored glass and stone, covered the vaulted ceilings and walls, depicting scenes from the life of Christ, the Virgin Mary, and various saints. The central dome featured a breathtaking mosaic of Christ Pantocrator, ruler of all, a standard Byzantine motif that symbolized the supreme authority of God and, by extension, the divinely sanctioned power of the Rus prince. Below this, the apse was dominated by a colossal mosaic of the Oranta praying Virgin, a powerful and iconic image in Orthodox art that served as the protector of the city. These works were not only beautiful, but also served a didactic purpose, teaching the largely illiterate population the tenets of the new faith. The cathedral also served as the political and intellectual heart of the state. It was the site of princely coronations, great state assemblies, and diplomatic receptions. A library was established within its walls, where Byzantine legal and theological texts were translated into Old Church Slavonic, a crucial step in the development of a written Rus culture. This flourishing of literacy and education under the Church's patronage transformed the Rus from a pre-literate society into a state with a sophisticated administrative and intellectual class. Thus, the Cathedral of St. Sophia was the definitive statement of Kievan Rus's newfound power and cultural maturity, a testament to Yaroslav's vision of a state that was not only militarily formidable, but also culturally and spiritually vibrant. The reign of Yaroslav the Wise was defined not only by military victories and domestic reforms, but also by a sophisticated and highly effective foreign policy centered on dynastic diplomacy. His strategic use of marriages to forge alliances with the royal houses of Europe was a crucial factor in Kievan Rus's full integration into the European political landscape. This practice demonstrated that Kievan Rus was no longer a fringe, semi-barbaric state, but a respected and powerful entity with a place among the Christian monarchies of the continent. Yaroslav's marital diplomacy was a deliberate and calculated strategy to secure his borders, establish new trade relationships, and enhance the prestige of the Rurikid dynasty. His family became the centerpiece of this political web. Most famously, his daughter Anna married King Henry I of France in 1051 CE. This marriage was not a mere romantic union. It was an extraordinary diplomatic coup that connected the Rurikid house with the Capetian dynasty, one of the most prestigious royal families in Western Europe. This alliance provided Kievan Rus with a powerful connection to the West, offering a counterweight to Byzantine and German influence, and solidifying Rus's status as a major European power. Another of his daughters, Elizabeth, married King Harald III of Norway, a famed Viking king. This marriage secured a crucial alliance with Scandinavia, which was still a vital source of military forces and a key trade partner. It reaffirmed the historical ties between the Rus and the Varangian world, while strengthening the northern borders of Kievan Rus. His daughter Anastasia married King Andrew I of Hungary, an alliance that helped to manage a complex relationship with the Hungarians and provided a buffer against Central European powers. These high-profile marriages were mirrored by similar strategic unions for his sons, who married princesses from Byzantium and Germany, further expanding the network of Rurikid alliances. Yaroslav's own wife, Ingigerd of Sweden, was a princess from the Swedish royal house, and their marriage had a calming effect on Rus-Scandinavian relations. The overall effect of this extensive marital diplomacy was the creation of a vast and interconnected family network that positioned Kievan Rus at the heart of European politics. The consequences of this diplomacy were profound. It provided Kievan Rus with a peaceful means of engaging with its neighbors, reducing the need for costly military conflicts. It opened up new channels for trade and cultural exchange, as foreign nobles and clerics visited the Kievan court, bringing with them new ideas and technologies. Most importantly, it conferred a sense of legitimacy and belonging on the Rurikid dynasty, which had been considered pagan usurpers only a few generations earlier. Yaroslav's dynastic marriages thus served as a testament to his vision, transforming his realm from a powerful but isolated state into a respected and integral member of the European political community. The golden age of Yaroslav the Wise, while a period of remarkable stability and prosperity, contained within it a fatal flaw that would ultimately lead to the fragmentation of Kievan Rus. His testament, a complex and unique system of succession known as Lestvishnoye Pravo, or ladder law, was designed to preserve the unity of his realm by preventing a direct transfer of power from father to son. Instead, it established a principle of seniority, where the throne of Kiev and the major principalities would pass laterally among brothers, and then down to the next generation of cousins based on age. This system, which had no direct parallel in other European monarchies, would prove to be a source of constant civil strife for centuries. The Lestvishnoye Pravo system dictated that the eldest living male of the Rurikid dynasty held the grand princely throne in Kiev. Upon his death, his next eldest brother would move up the ladder from a junior principality to take his place. The vacant principality would then be filled by the next prince in line, and so on. The youngest or most recently established princes would hold the least important territories on the peripheries of the realm. This meant that a prince's authority was not tied to a single hereditary land, but was constantly in flux, as he moved from one principality to another in a continuous, complex game of political musical chairs. Yaroslav's intention behind this system was to maintain the unity of the Rus lands, which he viewed as a collective family possession of the Rurikid dynasty, by ensuring that power was not concentrated in a single hereditary line. He hoped to prevent the kind of brutal civil wars he had fought to secure the throne. However, the practical application of the Lestvishnoye Pravo was a logistical and political nightmare. It created a constant source of tension and rivalry as princes vied for position in the succession ladder. The system was prone to manipulation and dispute, particularly when a prince died unexpectedly, leaving behind a young son who, by the rules of seniority, was relegated to a low-ranking principality or, in some cases, became an outcast izgoy with no land at all. The consequences of this succession system were profound and destructive. Rather than maintaining unity, it created a perpetual cycle of internal conflict. Princes, often supported by their retinues and allied nomadic forces, would resort to violence and intrigue to secure a more favorable position in the succession. This internal strife weakened the central authority of Kiev, diverted military resources from defending the borders, and allowed new power centers to emerge on the peripheries. Thus, Yaroslav's testament, a well-intentioned attempt to preserve the integrity of his realm, became the primary cause of its political fragmentation. The political framework established by Yaroslav the Wise, the Lestvishnoye Pravo, or ladder law, was intended to preserve the unity of Kievan Rus, but became the primary catalyst for its fragmentation. The inherent flaws of this succession system, which prioritized seniority over direct hereditary rule, led to a period of perpetual civil strife and the emergence of a new class of landless, exiled princes known as the izgoy. The breakdown of the ladder law and the conflicts that ensued mark the definitive beginning of Kievan Rus's political decline as a unified state. The Lestvishnoye Pravo was fundamentally destabilized by the natural progression of princely generations. As the number of Rurikid princes grew, the succession ladder became increasingly complex and unwieldy. The system was based on a prince moving from a junior principality to a senior one upon the death of an older relative. However, if a prince died prematurely, his son, regardless of his age or potential, was removed from the succession ladder. He became an Izgoyan outcast, or landless prince, who had no legitimate claim to a principality under the established rules. This created a powerful and resentful class of dispossessed nobles who had the military backing and dynastic connections to challenge the existing order. The emergence of these Izgoy princes was a profound political problem. With their land and status stripped away, they were forced to seek their fortunes through other means, often by becoming mercenaries or by forming alliances with other ambitious princes. They frequently looked to nomadic groups like the Polovtsians for military support, hiring their formidable horse archers in exchange for land rights or plunder. This reliance on external military forces further destabilized the state as internal conflicts became entangled with the ever-present threat of nomadic incursions on the southern frontier. The Izgoy were a destabilizing force that had nothing to lose by challenging the established order, and their actions made the succession disputes bloodier and more frequent. The constant internecine warfare weakened the central authority of the Grand Prince in Kiev. Resources that should have been used to defend the borders against nomadic raids were instead diverted to fighting other Rurikid princes. The great principalities of the realm, such as Vladimir Suzdal in the north and Galicia Volhynia in the southwest, began to assert their independence, developing their own administrative systems and military forces. These new power centers increasingly ignored the authority of Kiev, treating the Grand Prince's title as a nominal position rather than a source of true control. The breakdown of the ladder law and the rise of the Izgoy thus represents the turning point from a unified Kievan Rus to a collection of fragmented, semi-independent principalities, setting the stage for the decline of the Dnieper trade route and the eventual demise of the old capital's dominance. Following the fragmentation of Kievan Rus, the southern steppe frontier, which had been dominated by the Pechenegs, underwent a significant geopolitical shift with the arrival of a new and formidable nomadic force, the Polovtsians, also known as Cumans. This Turkic people, migrating westward from Central Asia, established their dominance over the Pontic steppes in the mid-11th century, effectively displacing the Pechenegs and posing an immediate and persistent threat to the Rus principalities. Their presence fundamentally altered the military and political landscape, as their constant raids became an ever-present danger that forced the fractured Rus princes to seek a unified response. The Polovtsians were highly mobile horse archers, masters of steppe warfare. Their military organization was based on a confederation of nomadic clans, which, while not a single unified state, could field large and highly effective raiding parties. These raids were not always for territorial conquest, but were often aimed at plunder, the capture of slaves, and the extraction of tribute. The Polovtsian raids were devastatingly effective, targeting agricultural settlements, monasteries, and small towns, disrupting trade and sowing widespread panic among the populace. The southern principalities of Kievan Rus, particularly Pereyaslav and Kiev, bore the brunt of these incursions due to their proximity to the steppe. This constant threat exposed the critical weakness of the fragmented Kievan Rus state. The incessant internecine conflicts between the Rurikid princes, fueled by the flawed Lestvishnoye Pravo, made a coordinated defense almost impossible. Princes, often more concerned with fighting their rivals for control of a particular principality, were slow to respond to the nomadic threat. The Izgoy princes, stripped of their lands, often sought mercenary alliances with Polovtsian khans to regain their power, further entangling internal Rus politics with external nomadic forces. This reliance on nomadic allies only served to legitimize and empower the very enemy that threatened the state's survival. However, the scale and frequency of the Polovtsian raids were so severe that they occasionally compelled the Rus princes to set aside their rivalries. Temporary and often fragile, alliances were formed to launch large-scale punitive campaigns into the steppe. The goal of these campaigns was not to conquer the Polopsian territory, but to inflict a decisive defeat on their forces and push them back from the Rus borders. These military operations, while sometimes successful, were short-lived, as the alliances often dissolved as soon as the immediate threat had passed. This pattern of conflict-devastating raids, followed by temporary Rus alliances, became a defining feature of the late Kievan period. The Polopsian threat, therefore, was a key factor in shaping the political landscape of a fragmented Kievan Rus, forcing its princes into a cycle of conflict and cooperation that would ultimately weaken the central authority of Kiev and accelerate the rise of new power centers. The period of political fragmentation and incessant Polopsian raids that characterized the late 11th century was briefly and powerfully interrupted by the reign of Vladimir Monomakh. His rule, from 1113 to 1125 CE, is remembered as a last heroic effort to restore unity and order to Kievan Rus, and it stands as a testament to the potential for centralized authority in the face of internal and external threats. Unlike many of his contemporary Rurikid princes, Monomakh recognized that the survival of the Rus lands depended on collective action rather than internecine conflict. Vladimir Monomakh was a seasoned and highly respected military commander. His reputation was forged in a series of successful campaigns against the Polopsians, which began long before he ascended the throne of Kiev. As Prince of Pereyaslav, a principality on the southern frontier that bore the brunt of nomadic attacks, he understood the existential threat posed by the Polopsians. He was a key architect of the temporary alliances that the Rus princes would form for defense, and he was the driving force behind the major punitive expeditions that took the war directly to the nomadic enemy. His most notable military achievement was the Great Campaign of 1111 CE, a large-scale, coordinated offensive into the Polopsian steppes. This campaign, which involved a coalition of Rus princes, resulted in a decisive victory that pushed the nomads back from the Rus frontiers and secured a rare period of peace and stability. Monomakh's political authority was as formidable as his military prowess. He was able to gain the Grand Princely throne not through the flawed Lestvichnoi Pravo, but by popular acclamation from the people of Kiev, who saw in him a prince capable of ending the political chaos and protecting them from nomadic raids. His rule was a period of legal and administrative reform. He expanded on the work of his grandfather, Yaroslav the Wise, by adding to the Ruskaya Pravda, particularly with new legal statutes that protected the rights of the peasantry and curtailed the power of usurers. These reforms were aimed at creating a more just and stable society, which he believed was essential for a strong state. His famous Instruction Paushinier, a testament written to his sons, serves as a remarkable historical document. It is a guide to princely conduct, urging them to rule justly, to honor their commitments, and most importantly, to unite against the enemies of the Rus lands. This document provides invaluable insight into Monomakh's political philosophy, which prioritized unity and strong ethical leadership. His reign, therefore, was a brief but significant return to the centralized authority of the early Kievan period. He successfully quelled the internal strife, largely due to his immense personal authority and his military successes against the Polopsians. However, this period of unity was fragile and dependent on his personal presence. His death in 1125 CE would usher in a new wave of succession conflicts and signal the final, irreversible fragmentation of Kievan Rus. The incessant internecine warfare, fueled by the flawed Lestvichnoi Pravo succession system, brought Kievan Rus to a point of near-total political collapse in the late 11th century. This period of fragmentation, exacerbated by the constant threat of Polopsian raids and the rise of a dispossessed princely class, created a growing consensus among some Rurikid princes that a new, more stable system was needed. This desire for unity culminated in the convocation of the Council of Lubech in 1097 CE, a pivotal attempt to formally end the succession wars and establish a new principle of primogeniture. The council was initiated by Vladimir Monomakh, who, though not yet the Grand Prince, recognized the existential threat posed by the political chaos. He persuaded the most influential princes of the array, including Sviatopolk II and Oleg of Chernigovto, meet at the town of Lubech, near Kiev. The purpose of the gathering was to address the two main sources of instability: the ongoing civil conflicts and the relentless Polovtsian incursions. The council's most significant resolution was a formal rejection of the Lestvichnoi Pravo as the sole determinant of succession. Instead, the princes agreed to a new principle: let each man hold his own patrimony vociny. This effectively established a system of primogeniture, where a principality would be inherited by a prince's direct son rather than passed laterally among brothers. The agreement at Lubech was a landmark event. It was a formal acknowledgement by the Rurikid princes that the old system was unworkable, and that a new, more stable principle was necessary for the survival of the state. It sought to transform the Rurikid clan from a single, mobile political unit into a collection of semi-independent, hereditary principalities. This new system was intended to bring an end to the endless civil wars by tying a prince's authority to a fixed territory, thereby eliminating the constant competition for the throne of Kiev and the higher-ranking principalities. The princes also swore an oath to unite against their external enemies, most notably the Polovtsians. However, the council's promise of unity was fragile and short-lived. The ink had barely dried on the agreement before it was violated. Just a year later, in 1098 CE, one of the princes, David of Volhynia, had his rival, Vasilko of Terabovl, blinded in a brutal act of treachery. This act of violence, a direct violation of the oaths sworn at Lubech, plunged the Rus lands back into civil strife. The failure of the princes to abide by their own agreement demonstrated that personal ambition and political intrigue were too deeply ingrained to be overcome by a formal treaty. The Council of Lubech, despite its noble intentions, ultimately sealed the fate of a unified Kievan Rus. The political fragmentation that followed was no longer a temporary aberration, but the new, irreversible reality of the Rus state. The tale of Igor's campaign Slovo o Polku Igoreve, a 12th century epic poem, stands as one of the most significant works of Old East Slavic literature. While its historical accuracy is debated, its cultural and political significance is undeniable, serving as a powerful reflection of the era's fragmentation and a poignant lament for a unified Kievan Rus. The poem chronicles a failed military expedition led by Prince Igor Sviatoslavich of Novgorod-Seversk against the Polovtsians in 1185 CE. This historical event, though a minor defeat in the broader context of Rus history, is elevated in the epic to a national tragedy, providing a window into the political anxieties and moral values of the time. The poem's central theme is the condemnation of princely disunity. The author, whose identity is unknown, repeatedly contrasts the glorious unity of the early Rus princes under Vladimir and Yaroslav with the self-serving ambition of the later princes. Igor's campaign is portrayed as an act of personal glory-seeking rather than a coordinated defense of the Rus lands. He and his brother Vsevolod launched the campaign without consulting the other powerful princes, leading to a disastrous defeat. This act of disunity is presented as a direct cause of the Rus' weakness in the face of the nomadic threat. The author's repeated use of the refrain, "O Rus' land, you are already behind the hill," serves as a tragic echo of the consequences of this fragmentation. The tale of Igor's campaign also explores the themes of betrayal and heroism. While Igor is celebrated for his personal bravery, his heroism is portrayed as flawed due to his political recklessness. The poem contrasts his misguided ambition with the potential for a greater collective heroism that could be achieved through a unified effort. The author's lament for the past is intertwined with a powerful call for a future of renewed unity. The poem's climax is a powerful and emotional appeal to the most powerful Rurikid princes of the era, urging them to set aside their rivalries and unite under the banner of the Grand Prince of Kiev. This appeal is a direct reflection of the political realities of the late 12th century, a time when the central authority of Kiev was in decline and new power centers were asserting their independence. The cultural significance of the epic lies in its portrayal of the Rus as a unified nation, a concept that was becoming increasingly challenged by the political reality of warring principalities. The poem's evocative language and its synthesis of Slavic folk traditions with Christian imagery created a powerful national myth that would resonate through generations. It preserved a historical memory of a time of unity and provided a moral compass for future rulers, urging them to prioritize the welfare of the Ruslands over personal glory. Ultimately, the tale of Igor's campaign is not just a chronicle of a military defeat, but a timeless political and cultural statement, a mirror held up to a fragmented society, and a powerful literary argument for the restoration of a strong, centralized state. The political fragmentation of Kievan Rus, accelerated by the failures of the Lestvizhnoye Pravo and the incessant civil wars, led to a fundamental shift in the state's political geography. The narrative of Rus history began to move away from Kiev as the sole center of power, as new semi-independent principalities emerged on the peripheries. These new power centers, most notably Vladimir Suzdal in the north and Galicia Volhynia in the southwest, developed their own economic, political, and military foundations, gradually eclipsing the influence of the old capital and permanently altering the structure of the Rus state. The Principality of Vladimir Suzdal, located in the forested lands of the northeast, was initially a peripheral territory within Kievan Rus. However, its geographic advantages, abundant land for agriculture, relative isolation from the nomadic incursions of the southern steppes, and access to new trade routes to the Baltic and Volga regions allowed it to flourish. Under ambitious princes like Yuri Dolgoruki and his son Andrew Bogolyubsky, Vladimir Suzdal developed into a powerful, centralized principality. Its rulers, no longer dependent on the Kiev throne for legitimacy, pursued an independent foreign policy and invested heavily in monumental architecture, such as the Cathedral of the Dormition in Vladimir, to project their new power. The princes of Vladimir Suzdal were often more interested in building their own power base than in controlling the distant and politically unstable throne of Kiev. To the southwest, the principalities of Galicia and Volhynia united to form another powerful new center. This region, strategically located on the border with Poland and Hungary, prospered due to its fertile agricultural lands and its control over vital salt mines. Galicia Volhynia's rulers, such as Yaroslav Osmomysl, were astute diplomats who forged alliances with their western neighbors and effectively defended their territories from nomadic and Polish attacks. This principality became a major hub of trade and culture, rivaling Kiev in its wealth and sophistication. The strong boyar aristocratic class in Galicia Volhynia, however, often challenged the power of the princes, leading to internal political conflicts that were a defining feature of the principality. The rise of these new centers of power marked the end of the unified Kievan state. The Grand Prince of Kiev, once the supreme ruler of all the Rus lands, saw his authority dwindle to little more than a ceremonial title. Control of Kiev became a symbol of prestige, But the real political and military power resided in the new, well-defined principalities. The decline of the Dnieper trade route, which had been Kiev's economic lifeblood, further accelerated this process. The relentless internal conflicts, the shift in trade, and the consolidation of power in the peripheries transformed Kievan Rus from a unified state into a collection of semi-independent, warring principalities, each with its own destiny. The fragmentation of Kievan Rus was not solely a political phenomenon. It was inextricably linked to a fundamental shift in the state's economic foundation. The strategic importance of the path from the Varangians to the Greeks, the riverine trade route that had served as the lifeblood of Kievan Rus for centuries, began a slow but irreversible decline during the 12th century. This economic downturn had profound consequences, weakening the central authority of Kiev and accelerating the rise of new power centers on the peripheries. The decline was caused by a combination of two primary factors: persistent military threats and the emergence of more efficient alternative trade routes. The first and most immediate cause of the Dnieper's decline was the constant military pressure from nomadic groups on the southern steppes. The Polovtsians, who had replaced the Pechenegs as the dominant nomadic force, posed a continuous threat to the southern section of the Dnieper trade route. Their raids targeted merchant caravans, disrupted river traffic, and made the overland portages and settlements along the route increasingly dangerous. The incessant internecine conflicts between the Rus princes, a defining feature of the late Kievan period, made a coordinated and sustained defense of the trade route nearly impossible. Resources that should have been used to secure the southern frontier were instead diverted to fighting for control of Kiev. The resulting insecurity on the Dnieper made it a less reliable and more costly avenue for trade, prompting merchants to seek safer alternatives. The second factor was the rise of new and more efficient trade routes that bypassed the Dnieper entirely. As the European economy developed, new commercial hubs emerged in the Baltic and Mediterranean seas. The Hanseatic League, a powerful confederation of merchant guilds in northern Europe, established a dominant position in Baltic trade, funneling goods to Western Europe through more direct sea lanes. Simultaneously, the Italian city-states of Venice and Genoa expanded their control over Mediterranean commerce, providing direct access to the markets of Byzantium and the Islamic world. These new trade networks offered merchants a safer and faster way to transport goods than the perilous and politically unstable Dnieper route. The economic consequences of this decline were devastating for Kiev. The city's wealth and power were directly tied to its position as the central hub of the path from the Varangians to the Greeks. As the volume of trade on the Dnieper dwindled, Kiev's economic influence waned. The revenue from tribute and trade, which had funded the princely retinues and monumental construction projects of the past, dried up. This economic weakness made it more difficult for the Grand Prince of Kiev to assert his authority over the new, more prosperous principalities in the north and southwest. The decline of the Dnieper trade route was therefore a key element in the broader political fragmentation of Kievan Rus, transforming a once unified state into a collection of disparate territories, each with its own economic and political destiny. The political fragmentation of Kievan Rus, which saw the decline of Kiev's central authority, was a period defined by the relentless ambitions of powerful regional princes. Among them, no figure better exemplifies the era's intense political rivalry and the shift of power away from the Dnieper than Yuri Dolgoruki, a Rurikid prince whose legacy is inextricably linked to the founding of Moscow and his constant struggle for control of the old capital. His nickname, Long-Armed, was a testament to his far-reaching political and military influence, which extended from his northern power base to the distant throne of Kiev. Yuri was the sixth son of Vladimir Monomakh, and was initially the Prince of Rostov-Suzdal, a peripheral principality in the forested north. Unlike his father, who had prioritized Rus unity, Yuri's primary objective was the expansion of his own power and the acquisition of the Grand Princely throne in Kiev. His reign was a continuous cycle of campaigns, alliances, and betrayals as he fought against his brothers and nephews for control of the most prestigious principalities. He often used his northern wealth and military strength to intervene in the political affairs of the south, a strategy that made him a constant and destabilizing force in Kievan politics. Yuri's relentless pursuit of Kiev's throne was a prime example of the political reality of the late Kievan period. Control of Kiev, while no longer the center of all Rus power, was still a symbol of immense prestige and legitimacy. He captured Kiev on 3 separate occasions, the first time in 1149 CE, but his rule was always temporary and contested. His hold on the city was fragile, as he faced the constant opposition of other princes who resented his influence and sought to oust him. His final and ultimately fatal capture of the throne in 1155 CE ended with his death in 1157 CE, reportedly at a feast where he was poisoned by the Kievan boyars who had grown weary of his rule. Despite his failures to establish a lasting hold on Kiev, Yuri's legacy was profound. His most significant and enduring act was the founding of Moscow. In 1147 CE, he hosted a meeting with a rival prince at a site that is now modern-day Moscow, an event that is considered the city's official founding. He later ordered the construction of a fortress on the site in 1156 CE. This act, while seemingly minor at the time, was a crucial step in the rise of a new power center. Moscow, strategically located on the Moscow River, would eventually become the heart of a new Rus state, a testament to Yuri's foresight in building up his northern territories. Thus, Yuri Dolgoruki's reign, though a story of constant struggle and limited success in the south, was instrumental in shifting the focus of Rus politics to the north and laying the groundwork for the future dominance of Moscow. The political fragmentation of Kievan Rus, initiated by the succession wars and the rise of new regional centers, reached a dramatic and symbolic turning point with the reign of Andrei Bogolyubsky, a prince whose actions definitively shifted the center of Rus power away from Kiev. As the son of Yuri Dolgoruki, Andrew inherited his father's ambition but pursued a more radical strategy for consolidating power in the northeastern principality of Vladimir Suzdal. His reign is a chronicle of a decisive break with the traditions of the past and the establishment of a new political paradigm for the Rus lands. Andrew's primary objective was not merely to control Kiev, but to diminish its political and symbolic importance in favor of his own northern capital, Vladimir. While his father had constantly fought to win and hold the Kievan throne, Andrew viewed the city as a source of endless conflict and a vestige of a decentralized past. In 1169 CE, he led a large coalition of princes and their forces in a campaign to seize Kiev. The capture of the city was not, however, a bid for its throne. Instead, Andrew subjected Kiev to a brutal and unprecedented 3-day sacking. This was the first time in Rus history that the city had been plundered by fellow Rus princes. The city was pillaged, its population was massacred, and its churches were desecrated, an act that shocked the Rus world and permanently damaged Kiev's reputation as the inviolable mother of Rus cities. After the sack, Andrew did not take up residence in Kiev. He instead installed a puppet prince on the throne and returned to his own capital, Vladimir. This act was a powerful political statement. It demonstrated that true power now resided not in the symbolic capital of Kiev, but in the new, well-organized and increasingly wealthy principality of Vladimir Suzdal. Andrew's decision to rule from Vladimir formalized the shift of political gravity to the northeast, a region that was economically stable and largely protected from nomadic incursions. Andrew's reign was characterized by a highly centralized and autocratic style of governance, which earned him the moniker the Pious. he systematically curtailed the power of the boyars, the old aristocratic class that had challenged princely authority in the past, and relied instead on a new class of loyal retainers and administrators. He was a fervent patron of the church, commissioning magnificent architectural projects like the Golden Gate and the Cathedral of the Dormition in Vladimir, which were designed to rival the grandeur of Kiev's St. Sophia and serve as symbols of his new capital's prestige. Andrew's political reforms and his brutal treatment of Kiev represent a definitive break from the old system of Kievan Rus. His actions not only accelerated the political fragmentation of the state, but also laid the groundwork for a new, more autocratic style of rule that would later become a defining feature of the Muscovite state. The political fragmentation and internecine conflicts that defined the late Kievan period left the Rus principalities militarily and diplomatically unprepared for the existential threat that emerged from the east. This threat, in the form of the Mongol Empire, first manifested in 1223 CE at the Battle of the Kalka River, an event that served as a catastrophic and, ultimately, unheeded warning of the impending devastation. This initial encounter, while a reconnaissance mission for the Mongols, was a military disaster for the Rus and a profound demonstration of their internal weaknesses. The Mongol force, a small detachment of approximately 20,000 horse archers, led by the legendary generals Subutai and Jebe, was on a scouting mission following a successful campaign in Central Asia. They were not seeking to conquer Rus, but to gather intelligence and secure their flank. Their advance into the Pontic steppes brought them into conflict with the Polovzians, the dominant nomadic power in the region. The Polovzians, facing a new and more formidable enemy, appealed to their former Rus rivals for assistance. This appeal led to the formation of a rare but fragile coalition of Rus princes, including Mstislav the Bold of Galicia and Mstislav III of Kiev. The princes, while wary of each other, recognized the need to confront the new force on the steppe. The coalition of Rus and Polopsian forces, numbering possibly up to 80,000 men, was a large army for the era. However, it was hampered by a lack of central command and a fundamental misunderstanding of Mongol tactics. The Rus princes, accustomed to more conventional European warfare, underestimated the discipline, mobility, and strategic cunning of the Mongol army. The battle took place near the Kalka River in present-day southeastern Ukraine. The Rus princes, unable to agree on a unified strategy, attacked in a disorganized fashion. Mstislav the Bold, in a reckless charge across the river, routed the initial Mongol forces. But his premature celebration left his army vulnerable. The Mongols, feigning a retreat, drew the disorganized Rus forces into a prolonged pursuit, a classic steppe tactic designed to separate and exhaust the enemy. The Mongol ambush was devastatingly effective. Once the Rus forces were sufficiently scattered, the Mongols turned and enveloped them. The Rus army was systematically destroyed, with many princes and their retinues killed. Mstislav III of Kiev and his forces were trapped in a fortified camp, which was eventually breached by the Mongols. The defeat was total and catastrophic. Yet, despite this crushing loss, the Rus princes failed to grasp the significance of the event. They viewed the Mongols as a new but temporary nomadic threat, not as the vanguard of a massive, disciplined empire. They returned to their internecine conflicts, failing to learn the lessons of unity and strategic planning that the battle had so brutally taught them. This unheeded warning at the Kalka River would prove to be a fatal mistake, leaving Kievan Rus tragically unprepared for the full-scale Mongol invasion that would arrive just over a decade later. The Rus princes' disastrous defeat at the Battle of the Kalka River in 1223 CE was not a random encounter, but the culmination of a highly calculated reconnaissance mission by the Mongol Empire. This expedition, led by the veteran generals Subutai and Jebe, was a prelude to the full-scale invasion that would arrive just over a decade later. To understand the catastrophic nature of this encounter, one must examine the sophisticated military and administrative systems that allowed the Mongols to field such a formidable force, a system that the fragmented Rus principalities were utterly unprepared to face. The Mongol military was a professional and disciplined fighting machine, fundamentally different from the feudal armies of the Rus. Its strength lay in its strict decimal organization, with soldiers grouped into units of tens Arbans, hundreds Yaguns, thousands Minghans, and a massive field army, or Tumen, of 10,000. This structure ensured a clear chain of command and high mobility, allowing for rapid deployment and complex tactical maneuvers across vast distances. The Mongol army's greatest weapon was its cavalry, composed of highly skilled horse archers who could fire accurately while riding at full gallop. Their composite bows, made from laminated layers of horn, wood, and sinew, had a range and penetrating power superior to most European bows, giving them a decisive advantage in missile combat. Beyond their tactical superiority, the Mongols possessed a highly effective administrative system that enabled them to maintain a massive military on campaign for years. Their conquests were not just military victories, but logistical masterpieces. The Mongol command structure, or yasa, was a codified legal and military code that ensured absolute obedience and coordination. The army was accompanied by a sophisticated logistics train, which could sustain troops in the field through a combination of foraging, plundering, and the efficient use of supply lines. The Mongol ability to conduct a prolonged reconnaissance mission of thousands of miles, culminating in a decisive victory at the Kalka River, was a direct result of this unparalleled administrative and logistical capacity. The purpose of the mission led by Subutai and Jebe was not to conquer Rus, but to gather intelligence on the political and military capabilities of the Rus princes and their nomadic neighbors, the Polovtsians. They sought to understand the geography, the terrain, and, most importantly, the political fault lines of the region. The battle at the Kalka River provided them with all the information they needed. They observed the Rus princes' disunity, their inability to agree on a unified command, and their predictable conventional military tactics. This scouting expedition confirmed for the Mongols that the Rus principalities were militarily weak, politically fractured, and ripe for conquest. The disastrous defeat of the Rus coalition at the Kalka River, therefore, was not an isolated event, but a grim foretaste of the far greater cataclysm that would arrive when the Mongols returned in force. The unheeded warning of the Battle of the Kalka River became a grim reality in 1237 CE, when the full-scale invasion of Kievan Rus by the Mongol Golden Horde began. This cataclysmic event, led by Batu Khan, a grandson of Genghis Khan, marked the beginning of a systematic campaign of conquest and destruction that would fundamentally alter the geopolitical and demographic landscape of Eastern Europe. The Rus principalities, politically fragmented and militarily unprepared, were unable to mount a coordinated defense, leading to the rapid and brutal destruction of their urban centers. The Mongol invasion commenced with an assault on the Principality of Ryazan. This was a strategic choice, as Ryazan was a powerful eastern principality that controlled a crucial trade route and presented an immediate obstacle to the Mongol advance. Batu Khan's army, a massive force of veteran Mongol and Turkic warriors, first sent an ultimatum to the princes of Ryazan and Vladimir Suzdal, demanding tribute. The Rus princes, believing they could negotiate or resist, refused to submit. In December 1237 CE, the Mongols laid siege to Ryazan. The siege was a devastating demonstration of Mongol military technology and tactics. They employed sophisticated siege engines, including trebuchets and battering rams, to breach the city's defenses. After a fierce and heroic defense, the city fell. It was completely razed, and its population was massacred. This brutal act was a powerful message to all other Rus principalities of the consequences of resistance. Following the destruction of Ryazan, the Mongol forces moved north toward the Principality of Vladimir Suzdal, the new center of Rus power. The Mongol campaign in this region was a whirlwind of conquest. The city of Kolomna was besieged and fell after a brief but bloody battle. The Grand Prince of Vladimir, Yuri II, was away gathering forces to meet the Mongol threat, leaving his capital and family undefended. In February 1238 CE, the Mongols laid siege to Vladimir. Using the same sophisticated siege engines that had destroyed Ryazan, they breached the city's walls in just a few days. The city was sacked, its magnificent churches were pillaged and burned, and the princely family was killed. The Grand Prince's forces, who had been amassing near the Sit River, were later ambushed and completely annihilated. The systematic destruction of Ryazan and Vladimir was not random violence, but a calculated military strategy. By targeting the most powerful and well-defended Rus cities, the Mongols sought to eliminate any possibility of a coordinated resistance. The speed and brutality of the invasion, combined with the Rus princes' inability to form a unified defense, ensured that no single principality could withstand the onslaught. The Rus had been given a chance to submit peacefully, but their defiance was met with a level of ferocity they had never imagined. The storm had descended, and with it came a period of devastation that would leave the Rus lands shattered and subjugated for centuries. The systematic destruction of the Rus principalities, initiated by Batu Khan's invasion in 1237 CE, reached its symbolic and tragic climax with the siege and fall of Kiev in December 1240 CE. This event was not merely the capture of another city. It was the utter devastation of the ancient capital, the mother of Rus cities, a hub of political and religious power that had served as the heart of Kievan Rus for over 3 centuries. The fall of Kiev was the final, definitive act in the Mongol conquest of the Rus lands, leaving the old capital in ruins and forever ending its dominance. After their devastating campaigns in the north, the Mongols turned their attention to the southern principalities. Their massive forces, having already honed their siege warfare tactics, arrived at the gates of Kiev in the autumn of 1240. At the time, Kiev was nominally ruled by the Grand Prince of Vladimir Suzdal, but the city itself was under the command of a military governor, Dmitry. The Mongols, in a final attempt to secure a peaceful submission, sent envoys to Kiev demanding that the city surrender. Their defiance was a testament to the city's symbolic importance, but it was also a fatal miscalculation of the Mongol military's power. The siege that followed was a grim and methodical affair. The Mongols, under the direct command of Batu Khan, were veterans of countless sieges and possessed a formidable array of siege engines, including trebuchets that could hurl massive stones against the city walls. These weapons, a technological marvel that the Rus had no effective counter for, methodically pulverized the city's fortifications. The Mongols concentrated their assault on the weakest point of the city walls, near the Lyadska Gate. After a prolonged bombardment, they succeeded in breaching the defenses. The Rus defenders, despite a courageous resistance, were no match for the disciplined and overwhelming numbers of the Mongol army. The fall of Kiev was followed by a 3-day sacking that was unparalleled in its ferocity. The Mongols pillaged and burned the city, leaving it in a state of utter ruin. The populace was massacred, and the great churches and monasteries, symbols of Rus's cultural and religious identity, were desecrated and destroyed. The primary chronicle and other contemporary sources paint a harrowing picture of the aftermath. The city's population was decimated, and its once bustling streets were filled with the dead. A papal envoy, Giovanni de Pian del Carpine, who visited the city a few years later, reported that Kiev had been reduced to a mere 200 houses, a stark testament to the Mongol devastation. The fall of Kiev was the final act in the destruction of Kievan Rus. It shattered the political and cultural heart of the state, leaving a power vacuum that would never be filled by a single central authority again. The city's influence waned, its population scattered, and its prestige was irrevocably lost. From its ashes, new power centers would eventually arise. But the glorious era of Kievan Rus was over, and the Rus lands were now firmly under the brutal subjugation of the Golden Horde. The Mongol conquest of Kievan Rus, culminating in the fall of Kiev in 1240 CE, did not result in a direct occupation of the Rus lands. Instead, it led to the establishment of the Golden Horde, a new Mongol Tatar state in the Pontic steppes, which governed the Rus principalities as tributary subjects. This period of subjugation, which lasted for over 2 centuries, is known in historical memory as the Tatar yoke. The relationship between the Rus princes and their new Mongol overlords was a complex political arrangement characterized by a feudal-style system of authority, military control, and economic extraction. The Golden Horde, a western Euless of the Mongol Empire, was established by Batu Khan with its capital at Sarai, on the lower Volga River. From this administrative center, the Mongols ruled their vast territories, which included not only the steppes, but also the fragmented Rus principalities. The Mongols' primary interest in the Rus lands was not in direct administration, but in the systematic extraction of wealth and manpower. They instituted a highly efficient system of taxation and tribute collection, which was overseen by Mongol officials known as Baskaki. These officials ensured that the Rus princes, in their roles as tax collectors, delivered the required tribute of furs, gold, and silver to the Golden Horde. The political relationship between the Rus princes and the Golden Horde was defined by a system of submission and conditional authority. Rus princes were required to travel to Sarai to pledge fealty to the Khan and to receive a yarlik, or patent of authority, for their principalities. Without this patent, a prince's rule was considered illegitimate. This system of yarlik provided the Golden Horde with absolute control over the Rus political structure. The Khans could grant or deny a yarlik, and they often played the Rus princes against each other, exacerbating existing rivalries to prevent any single principality from becoming too powerful. This strategy of divide and rule ensured that the Rus remained politically fragmented and militarily weak. The Mongols also exerted their dominance through a series of military levies and census-taking. Rus men were conscripted into the Mongol army for military campaigns, a practice that further weakened the principalities' ability to defend themselves. The Mongols conducted detailed censuses of the Rus population to ensure the efficient collection of taxes and to prevent the evasion of military service. This administrative control, combined with the ever-present threat of a punitive Mongol raid for non-compliance, ensured the Rus' continued subjugation. The era of the Tatar yoke was thus a period of political dependency and economic exploitation, but it was also a time when the Rus began to adapt to the new reality. Princes learned to navigate the complex political landscape of the Golden Horde, a skill that would become crucial for the eventual rise of Moscow and the liberation of the Rus lands from Mongol rule. The establishment of the Golden Horde did not lead to a direct Mongol occupation of the Rus lands, but it did create a new political reality. The Rus princes were now tributary subjects, and their authority was entirely conditional upon the will of the Mongol Khans. This submission was formalized through a humiliating and dangerous process that required the princes to travel to the Golden Horde's capital, Sarai, on the Volga River, to receive a yarlik, or patent of authority. This act of submission was a fundamental component of the Tatar yoke, and its political ramifications would shape Rus history for centuries. The journey to Sarai was a perilous and often fatal undertaking. The princes, accompanied by their retinues, had to travel hundreds of miles through the steppes. a journey that was beset by the dangers of travel and the political intrigue of the Khan's court. Upon arrival, they were subjected to a series of humiliating rituals to demonstrate their subservience. According to historical sources, they were forced to pass between two fires, a ritual of purification and a sign of respect for the Mongol gods, before they could enter the Khan's presence. In the Khan's court, they were required to prostrate themselves and perform a series of ceremonial obeisances, a public and absolute acknowledgement of their subservient status. The most crucial part of this process was the granting of the Yarlik. This patent of authority, a written decree from the Khan, legitimized a prince's rule over his principality. Without a Yarlik, a prince was a rebel, and his rule was considered illegitimate by the Mongols and often by his fellow princes. This system provided the Golden Horde with a powerful tool for control. The Khans could grant or deny a Yarlik based on a prince's loyalty, his ability to collect tribute, and his willingness to serve Mongol interests. The Mongols often used this system to deliberately exacerbate rivalries among the Rus princes, playing one against the other to prevent any single principality from becoming a threat. This divide and rule strategy ensured that the Rus remained politically fragmented and militarily weak. Among the princes who were forced to make this journey, Alexander Nevsky stands out as a prime example of a ruler who mastered the art of submission and diplomacy with the Mongols. While he is celebrated for his military victories against Western invaders, Nevsky's political strategy with the Golden Horde was one of absolute pragmatism. He traveled to Sarai multiple times, forging a close relationship with the Khans and consistently demonstrating his loyalty. In return, he received the most prestigious Yarlik, that of the Grand Prince of Vladimir, and Mongol support for his campaigns against his rivals. Nevsky's strategy, while controversial, was a successful one. He recognized that the Mongol power was absolute and that a direct military confrontation was futile. The best way to secure his principality's survival and to protect his people was through pragmatic submission. This strategy would later become the model for the Muscovite princes who would eventually lead the Rus to liberation from the Tatar yoke. The Mongol conquest of Kievan Rus, while devastating, did not eliminate all external threats. In the wake of the invasion, the fragmented Rus principalities also faced military pressure from the West, primarily from Catholic powers seeking to expand their influence in the Baltic region. It was in this context that Alexander Nevsky emerged as an iconic figure, a prince whose military genius, in repelling these Western incursions, earned him a lasting place as a national hero. His tactical brilliance in defeating the Swedes and the Teutonic Knights demonstrated that, despite their subjugation to the Golden Horde, the Rus could still defend their borders and their Orthodox faith. Nevsky's first major military challenge came from the Swedes. In 1240 CE, a Swedish force, likely seeking to gain control of the Dnieper River trade route and to impose Catholicism on the local populace, launched an invasion. Alexander, at the time the Prince of Novgorod, was a young and relatively unproven leader. He acted with remarkable speed and decisiveness. He did not wait for reinforcements from other princes, but instead led a small force of Novgorodians and his personal retinue in a surprise attack on the Swedish camp. The battle, fought on the banks of the Dnieper River, was a tactical masterpiece. Nevsky's forces, using the terrain and the element of surprise, caught the Swedes completely off guard. The Rus warriors, fighting on foot, defeated the Swedish infantry and killed their commander. This decisive victory, known as the Battle of the Neva, secured the city of Novgorod from Swedish control and earned Alexander his famous epithet, Nevsky. 2 years later, Nevsky faced a more formidable and organized threat from the Teutonic Knights, a military religious order that sought to conquer the Baltic and expand German influence in the region. The knights, veterans of the Crusades, were a professional army equipped with heavy cavalry and superior armor. In 1242 CE, the two forces met on the frozen surface of Lake Peipus. Alexander, again demonstrating his tactical genius, chose the battlefield with great care. He positioned his smaller, less armored army to face the knights' famous wedge formation, known as the Pig. The battle, later known as the Battle on the Ice, was a triumph of strategy over brute force. Nevsky had his army form a broad line, allowing the knights' heavy cavalry to break through the center. However, the Rus flanks, composed of his own warriors, then enveloped the knights, cutting them off from their own forces. The melting ice of the lake, a natural hazard of the chosen battlefield, further weakened the knights, who were burdened by their heavy armor. The Rus victory was total, effectively ending the Teutonic Knights' attempts to expand eastward and securing the western frontier of the Rus lands. Alexander Nevsky's military campaigns were crucial in defending the Rus from western expansion and preserving their Orthodox identity, while his political strategy toward the Mongols was one of pragmatic submission. His military actions against the Swedes and the Teutonic Knights demonstrated that the Rus were not a defeated people. He successfully protected his principality from the threat of Western conquest, a feat that would later cement his legacy as a defender of the Rus lands and the Orthodox faith. The political fragmentation of Kievan Rus, accelerated by the Mongol invasion and the decline of the Dnieper trade route, led to a fundamental shift in the geopolitical landscape. From this chaos, the Principality of Moscow emerged from obscurity to become the center of a new Rus state. This ascent was not a sudden military conquest, but a slow, deliberate, and highly strategic process, driven by a combination of geographic advantages, a pragmatic relationship with the Orthodox Church, and a mastery of diplomacy with the Golden Horde. Moscow's geographic location was a key factor in its rise. Situated in the dense forests of the upper Volga and Oka river basins, it was a peripheral territory that was largely protected from the devastating raids of the Golden Horde that plagued the southern principalities. Its location at the intersection of several river systems and overland trade routes allowed it to become a major commercial hub, attracting merchants and settlers who sought a more secure environment. This strategic position, combined with the principality's fertile lands, provided a stable economic base that allowed Moscow's princes to accumulate wealth and manpower while other principalities were in decline. The Muscovite princes also cultivated a shrewd and highly pragmatic relationship with the Orthodox Church. In the early 14th century, Prince Ivan I Kalita Moneybag successfully persuaded the Metropolitan of Rus, the head of the Orthodox Church, to move his permanent residence from the politically unstable city of Vladimir to Moscow. This move was a monumental political coup. The presence of the Metropolitan in Moscow conferred upon the principality a new level of religious and symbolic authority, transforming it into the spiritual center of the Rus lands. This alliance with the Church was a powerful tool for the Muscovite princes, providing them with a moral and religious legitimacy that was essential for unifying the disparate principalities. The Church, in turn, received the protection of the Moscow princes and a stable environment in which to operate, cementing a mutually beneficial relationship that would last for centuries. Perhaps the most crucial aspect of Moscow's rise was its skillful diplomacy with the Golden Horde. While other princes openly challenged Mongol rule, often with disastrous results, the Muscovite rulers, beginning with Ivan Kalita, adopted a strategy of pragmatic submission. They were meticulous in collecting and delivering the required tribute to the Golden Horde, and they consistently demonstrated their loyalty to the Khans. In return, they received the favor of the Mongols, who appointed the Muscovite princes as the official collectors of tribute from all Rus lands. This position gave them immense power and wealth, as they could use Mongol authority to suppress rivals and accumulate financial resources. This policy, while seen by some as collaboration, was a masterful political strategy that secured Moscow's survival and laid the groundwork for its future liberation from the Tatar yoke. By the late 14th century, Moscow had transformed from an obscure town into the most powerful and well-ordered principality, poised to become the new center of a unified Rus state. The period of Mongol subjugation, known as the Tatar yoke, was a catastrophic era for Kievan Rus, but its legacy extended far beyond military conquest and tribute. The Mongol impact was a complex and transformative force that permanently altered the course of Rus history, shaping its institutions, military, and its relationship with the rest of Europe for centuries to come. The Mongol rule, while politically oppressive, was not a static force, but a catalyst for profound, long-term changes that would ultimately contribute to the rise of a new, centralized Rus state. One of the most significant long-term impacts of Mongol rule was its effect on governance. The Muscovite princes, in their roles as tribute collectors for the Golden Horde, adopted a new, more centralized and autocratic style of rule. The Mongol system of administration, which demanded absolute obedience and ruthless efficiency, became the model for Muscovite governance. Unlike the fragmented, semi-feudal system of the Kievan era, the new Muscovite state was built on a principle of absolute authority, where the prince's power was not constrained by a boyar council or a democratic assembly. This shift from a more consultative form of rule to a highly centralized autocracy was a direct result of the political necessities of managing the relationship with the Golden Horde. The Mongol influence also left an indelible mark on Rus military tactics and organization. While the Rus princes had been aware of nomadic military methods, the Mongols' systematic use of light cavalry, horse archers, and disciplined mobile formations forced the Rus to adapt. The Muscovite army, in its wars to expand its influence, adopted elements of Mongol military strategy, including the use of highly mobile cavalry units and a more centralized command structure. This tactical modernization, which broke with the older, more conventional, infantry-based armies of the Kievan era, was a key factor in Moscow's military successes against its rivals. Furthermore, the Mongol rule had a profound and isolating effect on Rus's relationship with Western Europe. For over 2 centuries, the Rus lands were largely cut off from the cultural, economic, and intellectual developments of the Renaissance and the Reformation. The devastation of the Mongol invasion, the constant tribute payments, and the political subjugation created an impenetrable barrier between Rus and the West. While Western Europe was experiencing a period of renewed urban growth, technological innovation, and artistic flourishing, the Rus lands were focused on survival and political consolidation under Mongol rule. This period of isolation contributed to the development of a distinct cultural and political identity, setting Rus on a separate historical trajectory from its Western neighbors. The Mongol legacy, therefore, was a double-edged sword. It shattered the political and cultural framework of Kievan Rus, but it also provided a brutal lesson in centralization and a new model of governance and military organization that would be instrumental in the rise of a new, unified Russian state. The history of Kievan Rus, which began with the consolidation of power along the Dnieper River, concludes in an era of profound decline and fragmentation. The final centuries of the state were not a glorious military defeat, but a slow, irreversible process of political disintegration, economic collapse, and demographic catastrophe. The political unity of the early Rus princes, which was always fragile, had been irrevocably shattered by the flawed succession system of the Lestvichnaya Pravo and the relentless internecine warfare that it spawned. The central authority of Kiev, the once proud mother of Rus cities, had been diminished to little more than a symbolic prize in a constant struggle between rival princes. The economic foundation of the state, which had been its primary engine of growth and power, also withered. The path from the Varangians to the Greeks once a vital artery of commerce, became increasingly perilous due to nomadic incursions and the rise of more efficient alternative trade routes in the Baltic and Mediterranean. As the Dnieper trade declined, so too did the wealth and influence of Kiev, leaving the state's central treasury unable to fund the military forces and administrative networks necessary for a unified defense. This economic decline further fueled the political fragmentation, as new, more prosperous principalities in the north and southwest asserted their independence, no longer dependent on Kiev's commercial preeminence. The final blow to Kievan Rus came with the devastating Mongol invasion of 1240 CE. The fragmented and disunited Rus principalities, unable to mount a coordinated defense, were systematically destroyed by the disciplined and technologically superior Mongol army. The fall of Kiev in 1240 was the symbolic end of the old state, its capital razed and its population decimated. The subsequent period of Mongol subjugation, the Tatar yoke, solidified this fragmentation and introduced a new political reality of conditional authority and tribute collection, which further prevented any reunification. However, the legacy of Kievan Rus did not vanish entirely. From the ashes of its collapse, the foundations for a new state would emerge. The Christian faith, which had been adopted under Vladimir, survived the devastation and became a unifying force for the Rus people under Mongol rule. The cultural and dynastic heritage of the Rurikids, though fragmented, persisted in the new principalities, providing a sense of historical continuity. The legal framework of the Russkaya Pravda continued to influence local laws. Most importantly, the brutal lessons of centralization and autocracy learned under Mongol rule, combined with a pragmatic approach to diplomacy, would be adopted by the princes of Moscow. Moscow, a former backwater, would use these lessons to outmaneuver its rivals, consolidate its power, and eventually lead the Rus lands to liberation from the Tatar yoke. The twilight of Kievan Rus was therefore not an end, but a transformation, a brutal but necessary process that led to the birth of a new, unified Russian state from the shadow of the old.